I stood on the front porch of the home I had paid for with 40 years of sweat and concrete dust, and my hand froze on the brass doorknob. I had just driven 5 hours back from South Georgia burying my father, a man who lived to be 95 and died with his boots on. In my jacket pocket, I carried a folded deed that was supposed to be a blessing for my family, a surprise that would change our lives forever. 3 farms, hundreds of acres of pecan trees, and a house by the sea. I was ready to walk in there and tell my son Jamal and his wife Tiffany that their struggles were over. I was ready to be the hero. But then I heard a voice drifting from the kitchen that stopped my heart cold. It was Tiffany, and she wasn't crying for her father-in-law, she was laughing. And what I heard next froze the blood in my veins. Before I tell you how I turned their greed into their worst nightmare, please tell me in the comments where you are listening from today. If you have ever had to protect yourself from the very people you raised, hit that like button and subscribe because this story is about to get messy. I am Ezekiel Harper, and at 72 years old, I thought I knew what family meant. I was wrong. Standing there in the hallway, the silence of the house felt heavy, different. The air conditioning was humming, but underneath it, I could hear the sharp click of Tiffany's heels pacing on the ceramic tiles I had installed myself 10 years ago. I leaned in closer to the door, my ear pressing against the wood. "We have to do it this week, Jamal." Tiffany's voice was crisp, cold, and devoid of any sympathy. "The opening at Shady Pines nursing home won't last forever. We need to move him while he is still groggy from the funeral grief." I held my breath. Shady Pines. That place was a warehouse for the forgotten, a place where old folks went to stare at walls until they died. I gripped the deed in my pocket tighter, waiting for my son to defend me. Waiting for Jamal to tell her that his father was as strong as an ox, that I still walked 5 miles a day and could bench press more than he could. But Jamal just sighed, a weak, pathetic sound that made my stomach turn. "But Tiff, he is not sick. He is just sad. Dad is still sharp. He is 72. Jamal Tiffany snapped back, and I could hear the sound of ice hitting a glass. "He is slipping. I saw him forget his keys last week. It starts small. Look, we have maxed out the credit cards on the renovation and the business loan is due. This house in Buckhead is sitting on a gold mine. If we declare him incompetent and get power of attorney, we can sell this place for $2 million easy. We put him in the home, use the surplus to pay off our debts, and finally live the way we deserve." My knees felt weak, but not from age, from the sheer weight of the betrayal. This house was not just bricks and mortar. This was where my late wife Beatrice and I had raised Jamal. Every scratch on the floorboards had a story. The deck out back was where we held barbecues every 4th of July. And now this woman who had never worked a day of manual labor in her life was talking about liquidating my life's work to pay for her shopping addiction. And my son, my only son. "I guess you are right," Jamal said, his voice barely a whisper. "He has been acting distant lately. Maybe it is for the best. If the doctor says he is losing it, then who are we to argue?" That was the dagger. My own son was willing to sign away my freedom because he was too weak to stand up to his wife and too lazy to earn his own money. I wanted to kick that door open. I wanted to storm in there and tear up the deed to the farms right in their faces and scream that they would never see a dime. My hand shook with rage. The old Ezekiel, the contractor who used to fire lazy workers on the spot, wanted to explode. But I stopped. If I went in there screaming, I would only prove Tiffany right. She would tell the police I was violent. She would tell the doctors I was unstable. She would use my anger to lock me away. No. Beatrice always told me that anger is a fire that burns the house down, but silence is the water that drowns the rats. I slowly took my hand off the doorknob. I stepped back one quiet foot at a time until I was back on the porch. I walked down the steps to my dusty Ford pickup truck and climbed inside. I sat there for 10 minutes staring at the steering wheel, breathing in the smell of old leather and sawdust. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I looked at the rearview mirror. The grief was still there in my eyes, but something else had joined it. A cold, hard resolve. They wanted a senile old man. Fine. I would give them a senile old man. I started the engine and drove around the block once just to clear my head. When I pulled back into the driveway, I made sure to park a little crooked, just enough to look like my eyesight was failing. I walked up the path, dragging my feet, slightly slumping my shoulders. I was not Ezekiel the provider anymore. I was the prey, or so they thought. I opened the front door this time, letting it slam shut a little too hard. Jamal Tiffany. I am home. I called out, my voice raspy and tired. I walked into the kitchen. They were sitting at the island. Tiffany jumped a little, guilt flashing across her perfectly made-up face before she smoothed it over with a fake smile. Jamal looked down at his coffee, unable to meet my eyes. Dad, Tiffany cooed, getting up to hug me. Her perfume was expensive and cloying. We were so worried about you. How was the drive? You must be exhausted. Come sit down, let me get you some water. I let her guide me to the chair. I sat down heavily, letting out a long sigh, rubbing my temples. It was a long drive, I mumbled, staring at the granite countertop. Dad was... well, he is gone. The funeral was nice, though. Lots of old folks. I looked at Jamal. He was shifting in his seat, looking everywhere but at me. Did Grandpa leave anything behind? Jamal asked, his voice tight. I mean, aside from his old truck and those tools. I reached into my pocket and felt the paper. The deed to 300 acres of prime Georgia farmland, pecan groves that produce some of the best nuts in the state, and a beachfront property that developers had been eyeing for decades. The lawyer had told me the conservative estimate was $5 million, but if managed right, it could be double that. I pulled my hand out, but I left the paper inside. Yeah, I said slowly, scratching my chin as if I was trying to remember. He left a mess mostly. You know how he was, a hoarder. But there was some land, just some old dirt farms down near the coast, probably just scrub brush and swamp. I saw Tiffany's eyes narrow. She was a real estate agent. The words land and coast triggered something in her reptilian brain. Coast? She asked, casual but sharp. Where exactly on the coast, Dad? Down near Savannah, I think I said, waving my hand dismissively. I have the papers somewhere. 3 farms, a house. But honestly, I am too tired to deal with it. I was thinking of just letting the county take it for taxes. What does an old man like me need with 3 farms? I can barely manage this house anymore. I dropped the bait and waited. The silence in the room changed texture. It went from tense to electric. Tiffany looked at Jamal and then back at me. Her pupils dilated. I could practically hear the calculator clicking in her head. Coastal land near Savannah was some of the most expensive real estate in the South. Oh, Dad, you should not be so hasty, Tiffany said, her voice dripping with sudden honey. You know Jamal and I could help you with that. We could take a look at the papers for you. You are grieving, you are not thinking clearly. You should not let family property go to the county. That would be irresponsible. I looked up at her, feigning confusion. You think so? I asked. It just seems like so much work. And my memory... I paused, letting the sentence hang. I forgot where I put my keys yesterday. Maybe I am just getting too old for all this business. Jamal finally looked up. The greed in his eyes was not as sharp as hers, but the desperation was there. Dad, Tiff is right. We can handle it. We can go down there and check it out. You do not have to do anything. Just rest. I looked at them. My son, who I had carried on my shoulders, and his wife, who wanted to throw me in a hole. They thought they were circling a wounded animal. They did not know they were stepping into a cage with a lion. I sighed again and patted my pocket. Maybe you are right, I said softly. Maybe I do need help. The lawyer said something about the soil being good for pecans, but who knows? I am just a tired old man. I stood up, groaning for effect. I am going to take a nap, I said. We can talk about the farms later. If I can find the papers. I think I might have left them in the truck, or maybe at the funeral home. I cannot remember. I watched panic flicker across Tiffany's face. She did not want those papers lost. Do not worry, Dad, she said quickly, almost manic. Go sleep. We will look for them. We will take care of everything. I turned my back to them and walked toward the stairs. As I climbed step by step, I heard them whispering furiously below. Did you hear that? Tiffany hissed. Coastal land. 3 farms. That could be millions, Jamal. Millions. We cannot put him in the home yet. Not until we get him to sign those farms over to us. We have to wait, Jamal whispered back. Cancel the appointment at Shady Pines, Tiffany ordered. We have to play the long game. We need to be nice to him. We need to make him trust us until he signs that deed. Then we dump him. I reached the top of the stairs and walked into my bedroom. I closed the door and locked it. I walked over to the dresser where Beatrice's picture sat in a silver frame. I picked it up and looked at her kind, smiling face. I am sorry, Bea, I whispered, my voice trembling with a rage I could finally let out. Our son is gone. The boy we raised is dead. What is downstairs is a stranger. I took the deed out of my pocket and smoothed it out on the bedspread. They wanted the farms. They wanted the money. They wanted to strip me of everything I had and toss me aside. Well, I was going to give them exactly what they wanted. I was going to give them the farms. I was going to give them the responsibility, the debt, and the impossible legal clauses they never bothered to read about. I was going to let them taste the fortune just long enough to choke on it. I pulled out my old flip phone and dialed the number of my personal lawyer, a man who had been my friend since Vietnam. "Hello, Zeke," his voice crackled. "Simon," I said, staring at the door, "do not file the final probate papers yet. I have changed my mind about the distribution. What are you planning?" Zeke Simon asked. "I am planning a lesson, Simon, a very expensive lesson." I hung up and sat on the edge of the bed listening to the sounds of my son and daughter-in-law downstairs celebrating a fortune they did not own yet. They thought they were the hunters. They had no idea they had just become the hunted. Tomorrow the game would begin, and I was going to play it until they had nothing left but the truth. The smell of bacon and freshly brewed hazelnut coffee woke me up the next morning. For the past 3 years, breakfast in this house had been a slice of cold toast, or a bowl of dry cereal that I had to pour myself while Tiffany rushed around the kitchen ignoring me like I was a piece of old furniture. But today the aroma drifting upstairs was rich and heavy enough to choke a horse. It was the smell of bribery. I lay in bed for a moment staring at the ceiling fan spinning slowly above me. I knew exactly what was happening downstairs. The bait I had cast the night before, those 3 little words about farms and the coast, had been swallowed whole. Now the hook was set and the line was tight. I swung my legs out of bed and my knees popped a reminder of the years I spent laying foundations and framing houses. Tiffany thought my body was failing me, but she didn't understand that old wood is harder than new pine. I splashed cold water on my face, looked at my reflection, and put on my mask. The mask of the confused, slightly weary old man who just wanted to be taken care of. When I walked into the kitchen, the transformation was so drastic it was almost comical. Tiffany was standing by the stove wearing a floral apron over her silk blouse. She turned as I entered, and her face lit up with a smile so bright it looked painful. "Good morning, Dad," she chirped, her voice an octave higher than usual. "Look, I made your favorite, scrambled eggs with cheese bacon and biscuits. Sit down, let me get you coffee." Jamal was sitting at the table, not on his phone for once, but reading a property magazine. He jumped up to pull my chair out. "Morning pop sleep, okay?" he asked, patting my shoulder. I sat down, moving slowly, letting out a groan as I settled into the chair. "I slept all right," I mumbled, rubbing my eyes. "Strange dreams, though. Dreamt about the old pecan grove back home, the wind blowing through the trees." Tiffany froze the spatula hovering over the skillet. She exchanged a quick look with Jamal. The greed in the room was so thick you could cut it with a knife. She placed the plate in front of me, piling the eggs high. "That sounds lovely, Dad," she said, leaning against the counter, trying to sound casual. "You mentioned the grove yesterday. You said Grandpa left you 3 farms. That is a lot of land to manage." I took a bite of the eggs. They were undercooked just the way I hated them, but I chewed slowly, nodding my head. "It is," I said, staring past her out the window. "Too much land. Miles of it. And that house near the water. The salt air eats everything if you do not keep it up. It is just a burden, Tiffany. Just a big, heavy burden." Tiffany poured herself a cup of coffee and sat down opposite me. Her eyes were laser-focused. "Well, Dad, you know, Jamal and I have been talking. We were thinking about that appointment at Shady Pines." I stopped chewing. My heart skipped a beat, but I kept my face blank. "And we decided to cancel it," she said quickly, reaching across the table to pat my hand. Her skin was cold. "You are family, Dad. We do not want to send you away. Especially not when you have all this stress to deal with. We want to help you manage it." I looked at Jamal. He was nodding vigorously like a bobblehead doll. "Yeah, Pop, we got you. We can handle the heavy lifting. You just relax." I took a sip of coffee to hide the smirk that was fighting to form on my lips. They were not offering to help. They were offering to take over. "I appreciate that, son," I said, my voice trembling just enough. "I really do. I tried to look for the papers last night, but my eyes were blurry. All I remember is the location. It is in McIntosh County, right on the marsh." "McIntosh County," Tiffany repeated the name as if it were a prayer. She stood up abruptly. "Excuse me for a second, I need to check something for work." She practically ran to the living room where her laptop was set up. I continued eating my breakfast, listening to the furious clicking of keys. Jamal stayed at the table, shifting in his seat, looking like a kid waiting for Christmas morning. "Is it really on the water, Pop?" he asked, his voice low. "Right on it," I said. "You can see the ocean from the back porch. Your mother loved it there. We planted the pecan trees 40 years ago. They should be mature now." From the living room I heard a gasp, then silence. Then the sound of Tiffany hurrying back into the kitchen. She was holding the laptop, her eyes wide and wild. "Dad," she said, breathless, "I just looked up land values in McIntosh County. Do you have any idea what mature pecan orchards are going for right now? The demand for domestic nuts is through the roof, and waterfront property with marsh views." She turned the laptop screen toward me, showing a Zillow listing for a similar property. The price tag was blurry to my old eyes, but I knew it had a lot of zeros. "This is a gold mine," she whispered. "Dad, if you have 300 acres like you said, we are looking at $5 million. Maybe more if we subdivide it for developers." I squinted at the screen, feigning ignorance. "5 million, I repeated slowly, as if the number was too big to comprehend. "That sounds like a lot of trouble, Tiffany. The taxes alone." "We can cover the taxes," she interrupted, her eyes manic. "We can take out a bridge loan against the equity of this house. Dad, listen to me. You cannot let the county take this. You have to let us help you secure this asset." I sighed, putting my fork down. "I do not know," I said, rubbing my forehead. "I just wanted to rest. But if you think it is best—" "It is best," she insisted. "Trust me, I am a real estate agent. I know this market." I looked at her. I saw the dollar signs reflecting in her eyes. I saw the vacation homes, the designer bags, the status she was desperate for. What she did not see, what she did not bother to ask about, was the nature of the land. In the South, among black families, there is a term called heirs property. It means the land was passed down without a clear will generations ago, held in common by all descendants. My father had spent 50 years buying out cousins and distant relatives to consolidate it, but on paper it was still tricky. And more importantly, I had placed it in a blind trust years ago with a conservation easement. That meant the land could not be subdivided. It could not be developed into condos or golf courses. It had to remain agricultural or wild forever. The value was in the soil, not in the sale. But Tiffany did not know that. She saw land and she saw a paycheck. She did not respect the history, so she did not understand the restrictions. "I guess we can go look at it next week," I said softly. "Next week," Tiffany exclaimed. "We should go this weekend. We will drive down. We will assess the property. Jamal, you can get the car ready." Jamal stood up, puffing out his chest. "Actually, Tiff, about the car," he said, a grin spreading across his face. "I was thinking, if we are going to be managing a multi-million-dollar estate, we need to look the part. You know, showing up in that old sedan? It does not scream success." Tiffany looked at him, and for a second I thought she would scold him, but then she nodded. "You are right," she said. "Image is everything in this business. If we are meeting with county officials or buyers, we need to project power." I watched them feeding off each other's delusion. It was a sickness. They had not seen a single acre of dirt yet. They were already spending the harvest. "I am going to the dealership today," Jamal said, rubbing his hands together. "I saw this Range Rover online. Black on black. It is perfect for off-roading on the farm, but classy enough for the city." I felt a pit form in my stomach. Jamal was broke. I knew he was broke because he had borrowed $500 from me last month just to pay his phone bill. "How are you going to pay for a Range Rover, son?" I asked quietly. He waved his hand dismissively. "Financing, Pop. Easy. With the projected assets from the inheritance, I can get approved for anything. Plus, once we sell the first parcel of land, I will pay it off in cash." He walked over and kissed the top of my head. A kiss of betrayal. "Thanks, Pop. You really came through. We are going to take care of you. I promise." He grabbed his keys and whistled as he walked out the door. Tiffany went back to her laptop, already browsing luxury interior designers, probably planning how to remodel the farmhouse she had never seen. I sat there alone at the table with my half-eaten bacon. I looked at the grease congealing on the plate. They were celebrating a victory they had not won. They were spending money they did not have. And they were doing it all on the back of a lie I had fed them. Part of me wanted to stop them. To tell Jamal to turn around, to tell Tiffany that the land was not for sale, that it was sacred ground. I wanted to shake them and say that wealth is not what you spend, it is what you build. But I knew they would not listen. They were deaf to wisdom and hungry for easy street. I stood up and took my plate to the sink. I washed it by hand, staring out at the backyard where the grass was overgrown because Jamal was too lazy to mow it. Go ahead, I whispered to the empty room. Buy the car, dream the dream, because when you wake up, the reality's going to hit harder than a freight train. I walked into the living room. Tiffany was on the phone now, her voice low and serious. Yes, this is Tiffany Harper. I need to speak to a loan officer immediately. Yes, it is regarding a high-value asset liquidity. I walked past her, and she didn't even look up. I was invisible again. Just a signature they needed, just a stepping stone on their path to glory. I went out to the front porch and sat in my rocking chair. I closed my eyes and listened to the distant sound of traffic. They thought they had hooked a whale, but they didn't know that sometimes the whale pulls the boat under. I had given them the rope. Now I just had to wait for them to tie the noose. The trip to Georgia was going to be an education, and tuition was going to be very, very expensive. I pulled into my driveway at 2 p.m. expecting peace, but instead I found a silver sedan parked right where I usually put my truck. It had a magnetic sign on the door that read Pinnacle Asset Appraisals. My stomach tightened. I had not called anyone to appraise my house. I turned off the engine and sat there for a moment, listening to the ticking of the cooling metal. This was my sanctuary. I built this place in 1992. I poured the foundation with my own hands. I framed every wall. I knew every squeak in the floorboards and every draft in the windows because I was the one who put them there. And now someone was inside without my permission. I walked up the front steps, not dragging my feet this time. I opened the door and the sound of voices hit me. Just move that chair to the side. I need to get the square footage of the dining area, a man's voice said. I stepped into the foyer. There was a young white man in a cheap suit holding a laser measuring device, aiming it at my wall. Another man was taking photos of my fireplace. Tiffany was standing in the middle of the room, pointing at my recliner like she was directing traffic. "Excuse me," I said, my voice low and rumbling like thunder before a storm. The room went silent. The man with the laser turned around, looking surprised. Tiffany spun on her heel, her face flushing pink for a split second before she plastered on that fake smile again. "Dad," she exclaimed, "you are back early. We thought you were at the hardware store." I ignored her. I looked straight at the man in the suit. "Who are you, and why are you measuring my house?" The man looked at Tiffany, then back at me. He gave a nervous chuckle. "I am Dave from Pinnacle. Your daughter-in-law hired us to do a rush valuation on the property. We are just getting the specs for the listing." "Listing?" The word hung in the air like smoke. "Get out," I said. Dave blinked. "Excuse me, sir." I took a step forward. I am 72 years old, but I spent 40 years lifting lumber and swinging hammers. I still have shoulders that fill a doorway. I said, "Get out of my house. Now. Or I will help you out." Dave looked at my hands, which were curled into fists. He lowered his laser. "Look, man, I do not want any trouble. Mrs. Harper said everyone was on board." "This is Mr. Harper's house," I growled, pointing at my chest. "And Mr. Harper is telling you to leave before he calls the police for trespassing." Dave did not need to be told twice. He grabbed his bag, signaling to the photographer. They scurried past me out the front door like roaches when the lights turn on. I slammed the door behind them and locked the deadbolt. Then I turned to Tiffany. She was not apologizing. She was standing there with her arms crossed, looking annoyed like I had just ruined a surprise birthday party instead of stopping a theft. "That was incredibly rude, Dad," she said, huffing. "Those were professionals. Do you know how hard it is to get an appraisal on short notice?" I walked into the living room, my boots heavy on the hardwood. "You are trying to sell my house, Tiffany, without even asking me." "I am not trying to sell it," she lied, smooth as silk. "I am trying to value it." "Dad, we need to know what our assets are worth if we are going to manage this estate properly. The farms, the beach house, this place. It is a portfolio. You cannot just keep everything in your head anymore. You are not a contractor anymore. You are a wealthy man now, and wealthy men have strategies." She walked over to the table and picked up a stack of documents I had not noticed before. Jamal walked in from the patio looking like a kicked puppy. He must have been hiding out there while the appraisers were working. "Pop, listen," he started. "Zip it, Jamal," I snapped. "I am talking to your wife." I looked at Tiffany. She held the papers out to me. "Dad, look at this logically," she said, her voice dropping to that patronizing tone she used when she thought I was being difficult. "You are 72. Your blood pressure is high, your memory is slipping. Managing 3 farms and a house in Buckhead is a full-time job. You should be resting, playing golf, enjoying your golden years. You should not be worrying about property taxes and zoning laws." She tapped the paper with her manicured fingernail. "This is a standard power of attorney, Dad. It just gives Jamal and me the legal authority to sign documents on your behalf, to handle the boring stuff. You still own everything, we just do the legwork. It is for your own good." I looked at the document. Durable power of attorney. I knew exactly what that meant. It meant they could empty my bank account, sell my properties, and put me in a home without me being able to say a word. It was signing away my life. I looked at her, and then I looked at Jamal. He was staring at his shoes again. "So this is the plan," I said quietly. "You think I am too old to handle my own business." "It is not about age, Dad," Tiffany said, stepping closer, invading my personal space. "It is about capacity. You forgot your keys yesterday. You forgot where the farm deed was. It starts small. We are just trying to protect you before you make a mistake that costs the family everything." I laughed, a dry, bitter sound. "Protect me? You mean protect your inheritance?" Tiffany's eyes hardened. The mask slipped just a fraction. "Someone has to think about the future, Ezekiel. You are not going to live forever. And Jamal, well, we both know Jamal is not a businessman. He needs my help, and I need legal authority to help him. Just sign the paper. Stop being stubborn." I took the paper from her hand. I looked at it for a long moment. Then I slowly crumpled it into a ball and tossed it into the fireplace. "No," I said. Tiffany's jaw clenched. "Dad, you are being unreasonable. My house, my rules, my money. As long as I am breathing, nobody signs my name but me. And if you ever bring another appraiser into this house without my permission, I will change the locks and put your bags on the curb. Do I make myself clear?" I did not wait for an answer. I turned and walked toward the kitchen. My heart was pounding in my chest, a dangerous rhythm. The confrontation had spiked my adrenaline, and I could feel the familiar throbbing in my temples. I needed my blood pressure medication. I walked to the cabinet above the sink where I always kept my pill organizer. I opened the door. It was empty. I frowned. I distinctly remembered filling it on Sunday. I looked on the counter. I looked in the drawer. Nothing. I felt a wave of dizziness wash over me. The pressure behind my eyes was building. I turned around. Tiffany was standing in the doorway watching me. "Looking for something, Dad?" she asked innocently. "My pills," I said, rubbing my forehead. "My lisinopril. It was right here." "Oh, Dad," she said, shaking her head with a pitying smile. "You probably misplaced them again. You know how you get lately." "I did not misplace them," I said, my voice rising. "I never misplace them. It is my heart medicine, Tiffany. I take it every day at 2 o'clock. Maybe you took them already," she suggested, walking over and opening the trash can. She peered inside. "Oh, look." She reached into the garbage and pulled out my empty orange pill bottle. "You threw the bottle away, Dad. See? You must have finished them and forgot to call for a refill." I stared at the empty bottle in her hand. That bottle had been half full yesterday. I knew it. I was meticulous about my health because I wanted to live long enough to see my grandchildren if I ever had any. "I did not finish them," I whispered. "There were 2 weeks left." Tiffany sighed loud and long. "See, this is exactly what I am talking about. You are confused. You think you have pills, but you threw the bottle away. You are not safe managing your own meds anymore, Dad, let alone a $5 million estate." She tossed the bottle back in the trash. "I will call the pharmacy and see if I can get an emergency refill," she said, turning away. "But you really need to acknowledge that you need help. This is scary, Dad. You could have had a stroke." She walked out of the kitchen, pulling her phone out, leaving me standing there, gripping the counter for support. I knew I had not thrown those pills away. I knew she had taken them. She was gaslighting me. She was trying to make me doubt my own mind, trying to manufacture the very incompetence she claimed I had. I felt the room tilt slightly. The stress of the argument combined with the missed dose was hitting me hard. I stumbled to the refrigerator and poured a glass of water, my hand shaking so bad I spilled half of it on the floor. Jamal came into the kitchen. He saw me leaning against the counter, sweating. "Pop, you okay?" he asked, sounding genuinely scared for a second. I looked at him. My son. The boy I taught to ride a bike. The man who was letting his wife poison his father. "Get out of my way!" I rasped. I pushed past him and headed for the stairs. I needed to lie down. I needed to calm my heart rate before it exploded. As I climbed the stairs, I heard Tiffany's voice from the living room. She was on the phone, but she was speaking loud enough for me to hear. "Yes, doctor. I am very concerned. He is becoming aggressive, and today he threw away his heart medication. He thinks he took it, but the bottle was in the trash. Yes, I think it is time for an evaluation. He is a danger to himself." I reached my bedroom and shut the door, leaning my back against it. I slid down until I was sitting on the floor. My chest felt tight. They were not just greedy. They were dangerous. Tiffany was willing to risk my life to prove her point. She wanted me to have a medical episode. She wanted me to collapse so she could swoop in as the savior with the power of attorney in one hand and a pen in the other. I closed my eyes and focused on my breathing. In for 4 seconds, out for 4 seconds. Just like in the army, I had to survive this. I had to stay calm. "I am not crazy," I whispered to the empty room. "I am not crazy." But as the pressure in my head grew, I realized that fighting them with words was not going to work. They controlled the narrative. They controlled the house. And now they were controlling my medicine. I needed to change the battlefield. I dragged myself over to the nightstand where I kept a hidden stash of aspirin. It wasn't my prescription, but it would thin the blood enough to keep me from stroking out tonight. I chewed 2 tablets dry. Tomorrow I would play their game. Tomorrow I would agree to see the doctor, but not their doctor. And I would make sure that when the gavel finally fell, it wasn't my freedom that was taken away. I lay on the rug, staring at the ceiling, waiting for my heart to slow down. The invasion had begun. They had breached the perimeter. But they had forgotten one thing. You never corner a man who has nothing left to lose. I was going to take them on a road trip they would never forget. And by the time we got back, the only thing getting appraised would be their integrity. The floor of my bedroom felt like it was tilting on a jagged axis. One moment I was standing by the nightstand, clutching my chest, and the next, the ceiling fan was spinning wildly out of control like a propeller on a crashing plane. The pounding in my head wasn't just a headache, it was a rhythmic thunder that matched the frantic beat of a heart struggling to push sludge through my veins. I reached out for the bedpost, my fingers scrabbling against the polished wood, but my grip had turned to water. The air in the room seemed to vanish, sucked out by a vacuum, leaving me gasping like a fish on a dock. I tried to call out for Jamal, but my tongue felt heavy and swollen in my mouth. My knees buckled and gravity took over. The last thing I heard before the darkness swallowed me whole was the sound of my own body hitting the floorboards, a dull, heavy thud that shook the pictures on the wall. And then silence. I don't know how long I was out. Time moves differently when you are floating in the gray fog of a hypertensive crisis. But when the world started to seep back in, it didn't come with light. It came with voices, sharp, sterile voices that cut through the haze. He is stable now, but his pressure was 180 over 110 when the paramedics brought him in. I recognized that voice. It was a doctor, young professional, and detached. Oh my God, that is terrifying. I knew something was wrong. I told my husband just yesterday that Dad has been acting so erratic lately. And there she was. Tiffany. Her voice was trembling, perfectly pitched to the frequency of a concerned, terrified daughter-in-law. I lay there keeping my eyes closed, my body heavy as lead under the scratchy hospital sheets. I had learned in the army that sometimes the best intel comes when the enemy thinks you are dead or asleep. Has been forgetting to take his medication?" the doctor asked. "Yes," Tiffany sighed, a sound of pure exhaustion. "We try to remind him, doctor. We really do. But he gets so confused. Yesterday he threw his entire prescription in the trash. He insisted he had taken them, but the bottle was empty. He gets aggressive when we try to help. He thinks people are stealing from him. It is really hard on us." I felt a surge of adrenaline spike in my chest, a dangerous thing for a man in my condition. She was weaving the net tighter. She wasn't just explaining a medical event, she was building a legal case. She was painting a picture of a paranoid, senile old man who couldn't be trusted with his own life, let alone his assets. "Dementia often presents with paranoia and non-compliance," the doctor said, his voice softening with sympathy. "We will run some cognitive tests once he is fully alert." But given his age and these incidents, you might want to start thinking about assisted living or at least a full-time caregiver. He shouldn't be alone. I opened my eyes. I didn't flutter them. I didn't groan. I just opened them and stared straight at the ceiling tiles. Dad, Tiffany gasped. "You are awake." "Oh, thank God." She rushed to the side of the bed, grabbing my hand. Her touch made my skin crawl, but I didn't pull away. I didn't yell. If I yelled, I was the aggressive old man she described. If I accused her of stealing my pills, I was the paranoid patient. "Water," I croaked. The nurse hurried over with a plastic cup and a straw. I took a sip, the cool liquid washing away the taste of bile and betrayal. "Mr. Harper, do you know where you are?" the doctor asked, shining a penlight in my eyes. "St. Joseph's Hospital." I said, my voice steady despite the weakness. "Tuesday. President is in the White House, and I am here because my blood pressure spiked." The doctor looked surprised at my clarity. Tiffany squeezed my hand tighter, her nails digging into my palm, a warning disguised as affection. "You gave us a real scare, Dad," she said. "You forgot your pills again." I turned my head slowly on the pillow and looked at her. I looked right past the fake tears in her eyes and into the dark, calculating soul beneath. "I must have," I said calmly. "My mistake. Won't happen again." I saw the flicker of confusion on her face. She wanted a fight. She wanted me to rave, but I gave her nothing. I turned back to the doctor. "When can I go home? We need to keep you for observation overnight, Mr. Harper. We want to make sure there is no lasting damage." "Fine," I said. "But I need to make a call. I need my phone." Tiffany hesitated. "You should rest, Dad. Who do you need to call?" "My lawyer," I said, closing my eyes again. The air in the room froze. "Your lawyer?" she asked, her voice tightening. "Why?" "To update my will," I lied. "A brush with death makes a man think Tiffany. I need to make sure everything is in order, for you and Jamal." She relaxed instantly. She actually patted my hand. "I will get it from your bag," she said, handing me the old flip phone. I waited until they left the room to get coffee. I didn't call the office. I called Simon's personal cell. He answered on the second ring. "Zeke, you okay? I heard you were in the ER." "I am fine, Simon," I whispered, watching the door. "Listen to me carefully. Do not finalize any paperwork for the farm transfer, and I need you to find me a private investigator, someone who can sweep a house for bugs and install cameras. Today." "Zeke, what is going on? War, Simon, war. Just do it, and bring the papers for the farm trust to the hospital, not the real ones. Dummy ones. I need props." I hung up and slid the phone under my leg. I lay there, forcing my breathing to slow down. I had to play the long game. I had to let them think they were winning until the trap was snapped shut. An hour later, Jamal arrived. He looked like he had been crying, or maybe he was just hungover. He stood at the foot of the bed looking at me with that same cowardly expression he had worn since he married Tiffany. I pretended to be asleep. I kept my breathing shallow and rhythmic. "Is he out?" Tiffany asked, walking in with 2 coffees. "Yeah," Jamal whispered. "Doctor said the sedatives would knock him out for hours." "Good," Tiffany said, and her voice changed. It dropped the sweet concern and became hard and businesslike. "We need to move fast, Jamal. The doctor is already on our side about the dementia. Once we get the power of attorney, we can list the Buckhead house immediately." "But what about the farms?" Jamal asked. He said he wanted to update the will. "That is just it," Tiffany snapped. "If he updates the will, he might put restrictions on it. We need him to sign the land over to us now before he dies or changes his mind. As soon as he signs those papers, we find a buyer for the timber and the pecan groves. I looked it up. The lumber alone is worth $500,000. Jamal shifted his feet. "You want to cut down the trees? Pop planted those trees with Mom." "Jamal, grow up," Tiffany hissed. "Do you want to be sentimental or do you want to be rich? Do you want to drive that Range Rover or do you want to keep driving a Honda? We sell the trees, we sell the land, and we never have to work again. And as for your dad, we put him in Shady Pines. It is better for him anyway. They have professionals there." I felt a tear leak from the corner of my eye and slide into my ear. It wasn't a tear of sadness. It was the last drop of love I had for the people in that room leaving my body. My son was going to let her clear-cut his mother's memory for a car. But they didn't know one thing. My hand was under the sheet and my thumb was pressed down on the record button of my phone. I got it all. The plan to sell, the plan to institutionalize me, the admission that they didn't care about my health, only my death. "Okay," Jamal said finally. "Okay. We do it your way." "Good boy," Tiffany said. "Now let's go get something to eat before he wakes up. I can't stand the smell of this hospital." I waited until their footsteps faded down the hall. Then I sat up. The dizziness was gone, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. I ripped the IV tape off my arm. A little blood trickled down, but I didn't care. I swung my legs over the side of the bed. I was weak, but anger is a powerful fuel. I wasn't going to stay here and wait for them to come back with their fake smiles and their poison. I dressed slowly, my fingers stiff. I checked out against medical advice. The nurse tried to stop me, but when I gave her a look that could peel paint, she handed me the clipboard. I took a cab home. The house was empty. They were probably still at the hospital cafeteria planning their new life. I went straight to my tool shed. I didn't need a private investigator for this part. I had been a contractor for 40 years. I knew how to run wires. I knew how to hide things in walls. I worked with a speed I didn't know I still possessed. I installed a pinhole camera in the molding of the living room ceiling, another one in the kitchen hidden in the smoke detector, and a third one in my bedroom right facing the nightstand where my pills had been stolen. I connected them to a cloud server on my laptop, password protected with a code only Beatrice would have known. By the time I heard their car pull into the driveway 2 hours later, I was sitting in my recliner, the TV on a blanket over my legs, looking for all the world like a frail old man who had just escaped a hospital. The front door opened. Dad, Tiffany shrieked, "What are you doing here?" "The hospital called us. They said you ran away." I looked at her. I looked at the spot on the ceiling where the camera lens was glinting almost invisibly. "I just wanted to be home, Tiffany," I said, my voice raspy. "Hospitals are for dying. I plan on living." She exchanged a look with Jamal, a look of annoyance. "Well, you can't just leave, Dad," she scolded, walking over to check my forehead. We were worried sick. "I bet you were," I said. I closed my eyes and leaned back. Let them talk. Let them plot. Let them dig their own graves. Every word they said from now on was being recorded. Every lie was being archived. "You know, Dad," Tiffany said, smoothing my blanket, "since you are home, we really should talk about those farm papers again. Before you get tired." I opened one eye. "Tomorrow," I said. "We will go see the lawyer tomorrow, I promise." She smiled. A predator's smile. "Okay, Dad. Tomorrow." She didn't know that tomorrow wasn't payday. Tomorrow was the beginning of the end. And the house she was standing in wasn't her inheritance anymore. It was a courtroom. And I was the judge. The drive down to South Georgia was a 3-hour tour of my son's vanity. We were sitting in the brand new Range Rover Jamal had leased just 24 hours ago, a black beast that cost more than my first 3 houses combined. The leather seats still smelled like the factory, and the air conditioning was blasting Arctic air that chilled my bones, but I didn't ask him to turn it down. I sat in the back seat watching the pine trees blur past, while Tiffany sat in the front passenger seat scrolling through her iPad showing Jamal pictures of luxury eco-lodges in Costa Rica. "See, babe," she said, her voice cutting through the road noise. "This is the vibe. Rustic but high-end. We knock down the old structures, put in glass cabins, and charge $500 a night. It is pure profit." Jamal nodded, his eyes fixed on the road, but his mind clearly counting money he didn't have. "Sounds good, Tiff. But we gotta see the land first, right? Make sure the foundation is solid." "Foundation?" Tiffany laughed, a sharp, dismissive sound. "Babe, with the kind of capital we will raise, we can build a foundation on quicksand if we have to." I stayed silent. My hand was resting on the door handle, and inside my jacket pocket the small voice recorder was humming, capturing every word of their delusion. They thought they were driving toward their future, but they were really driving toward a cliff. We pulled off the interstate and hit the county roads. The asphalt turned from smooth blacktop to gray, cracked pavement, and finally to red dirt. The dust kicked up behind us, coating the shiny black paint of the Range Rover in a layer of Georgia clay. I saw Tiffany wrinkle her nose as she looked in the side mirror. "Ugh," she groaned. "This car is going to need a full detail when we get back." "Is it much further, Dad?" "Just up the road," I said, pointing a calloused finger toward a canopy of ancient oak trees. "Turn left at the big rock." Jamal turned the wheel and the heavy SUV bounced over the cattle guard. We were officially on Harper land. My father had bought these first 100 acres in 1955 with money he saved from working the railroads. He had bled for this dirt. We pulled up to the main farmhouse. It wasn't a mansion. It was a sturdy white clapboard house with a wraparound porch and a tin roof that sang when it rained. Parked out front was a line of old tractors and pickup trucks belonging to the workers who had been harvesting the early pecans. Jamal killed the engine. The silence of the countryside rushed in, filled only by the buzzing of cicadas and the distant hum of a thresher. "Well, here we are," Tiffany said, unbuckling her seatbelt. "Let's get this over with." She opened the door and stepped out. I watched with grim satisfaction as her 4-inch Italian stilettos sank immediately into the soft red mud. "Oh my God," she shrieked, grabbing the doorframe for balance. "My shoes! Jamal! Look at this. It is a swamp out here. It rained last night," I said, climbing out of the back slowly, my boots finding purchase on the ground they knew so well. "It is a farm. Tiffany, dirt is part of the package." She pulled her foot free, leaving a perfect heel-shaped hole in the mud. She wiped her shoe on the running board of the rental car, leaving a streak of red clay on the chrome. "Disgusting," she muttered. We walked toward the barn. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth diesel fuel and the sweet musk of curing pecans. To me, it smelled like home. To Tiffany, it clearly smelled like a sewer. She pulled a silk scarf from her bag and held it over her nose. "How can anyone breathe out here?" she complained, muffled behind the silk. "It smells like manure." "That is fertilizer," I said, walking past her. "That is what makes things grow." We reached the sorting shed. Inside, a dozen men and women were working. Most of them were older folks, people I had known since I was a boy. They were dusting the nuts, checking for quality, their hands moving with a rhythm born of decades of labor. They stopped when they saw us. They took off their hats out of respect seeing me. Mr. Zeke, a large man named Moses, called out, wiping his hands on his overalls. "Good to see you, sir. We heard about your daddy. We are mighty sorry." I walked over and shook Moses' hand, gripping it tight. "Thank you, Moses," I said. He went peaceful. I turned to introduce my family. Jamal was standing awkwardly by the door, looking at his phone, trying to avoid eye contact. Tiffany was standing a few feet away, looking at the workers, as if they were exhibits in a zoo. "Moses, this is my son Jamal, and his wife Tiffany." Moses smiled a wide, genuine grin that crinkled the corners of his eyes. He extended a hand toward Tiffany. "Nice to meet you, ma'am. Welcome to the farm." Tiffany didn't move. She didn't extend her hand. She just stared at Moses' dust-covered palm and then looked up at his face with a mixture of fear and disdain. "Hi," she said flatly. Is there somewhere we can wash up? We have a lot of germs from the drive." The smile dropped from Moses' face. He slowly lowered his hand, wiping it on his pants as if he was the one who was dirty. "Sink is round back, ma'am," he said, his voice losing its warmth. I felt a flash of heat up my neck. That man had carried me on his shoulders when I was 5 years old. He had helped dig my mother's grave, and this woman treated him like he was contagious. "Come on, Jamal," Tiffany said, turning her back on the workers. "Let's find the manager. I want to see the financials, not the labor." I looked at Moses. He gave me a small, sad nod. He understood. He saw exactly what she was. I followed them out of the shed. We walked through the rows of pecan trees toward the small office building near the creek. Sitting on the porch in a rocking chair was Mr. Culpepper. He was 80 years old, a white man who had worked side by side with my father for 50 years. He was the steward of this land. He knew every tree, every irrigation line, every property boundary. He stood up as we approached, leaning heavily on his cane. He took off his straw hat, revealing a head of shock-white hair. "Ezekiel," he said, his voice raspy like dry leaves. "Good to see you, son." "Mr. Culpepper?" I said, stepping up onto the porch. He looked past me at the couple standing in the yard. Jamal was wiping dust off his designer sneakers. Tiffany was swatting at a gnat, looking at the old wooden office like it was a tear-down project. "These must be the heirs," Mr. Culpepper said. "Yes, sir," I said. "This is Jamal and Tiffany." Mr. Culpepper stepped down one stair, extending his hand. "Welcome, folks. Your grandfather was a great man. He left you a fine piece of earth here." Tiffany ignored his hand too. She walked right past him and pushed open the door to the office, walking inside without an invitation. "Is this where the records are kept?" she asked, her voice echoing from inside. Mr. Culpepper lowered his hand, his blue eyes hardening. He looked at me. "She is spirited," he said quietly. "She is something," I replied, my voice low. We followed her inside. The office was cluttered with maps, ledgers, and old photos of prize-winning harvests. It smelled of tobacco and old paper. Tiffany was already standing by the desk, running her finger over a layer of dust. "Okay," she said, clapping her hands together as if calling a meeting to order. Mr. Culpepper was it. "That is right, ma'am," Culpepper said, standing in the doorway. "Okay, Mr. Culpepper. We are going to need to see the profit and loss statements for the last 5 years, and the soil composition reports, and the survey maps." Culpepper looked at her confused. "Well, ma'am, those are in the filing cabinet. But Zeke here knows all that. We usually just sit down and talk through the harvest." "We are not here to talk harvest." Tiffany cut him off, her tone sharp and condescending. "We are here to talk liquidation, or rather restructuring." She walked over to the wall map, tapping a long manicured nail on the section near the river. "See this area here, the grove. It is inefficient. The yield per acre is too low compared to commercial development. We are planning to rezone this whole sector." Mr. Culpepper blinked. "Rezone?" he asked. "Ma'am, those trees are 70 years old. You can't just—" "We can and we will." Tiffany interrupted. "Look, Mr. Culpepper, I am sure you ran things fine in the old days, but we are looking at a luxury eco-resort concept. We need to clear this land, and frankly, we need management that understands modern real estate." She paused, looking him up and down with a sneer. "So you might want to start getting your things in order. We will probably be bringing in our own team by the end of the month. We need people who can move fast, not rocking chair speed." The silence in the room was deafening. Even Jamal looked up from his phone, shocked. "Tiff," Jamal whispered. "Maybe we should wait until—" "Hush," Jamal, Tiffany snapped. "Business is business." Mr. Culpepper stood very still. He looked at Tiffany, then he looked at me. His eyes were filled with a profound disappointment, not for himself, but for me. He thought I had raised them better. He thought I had taught them respect. I stood there leaning against the doorframe. I could have stopped her. I could have told her right then that she had no power, that she was talking to a man who had more dignity in his little finger than she had in her whole body. But I didn't. I needed this. I needed the recording to show not just greed but cruelty. I needed the judge to see that she wasn't just a bad daughter-in-law, she was a bad human being. Mr. Culpepper turned back to Tiffany. He put his hat back on his head, slowly adjusting the brim. "I reckon you will do what you think is best, ma'am," he said, his voice steady. "But the land has a way of rejecting things that don't belong. You might find that out the hard way." "Is that a threat?" Tiffany laughed, incredulous. "No, ma'am. Just a fact. Like the sun coming up." She rolled her eyes and turned back to Jamal. "Okay, let's go. I have seen enough. The buildings are garbage, but the location is prime. We can bulldoze all of this in a week." She walked past Mr. Culpepper, brushing his shoulder as she went, not even saying "excuse me." She marched out to the car, her heels clicking on the wooden porch steps. Jamal looked at Mr. Culpepper. He opened his mouth to say something, maybe to apologize, but he didn't have the spine. He just looked down and hurried after his wife. I was the last one left in the room. I looked at Mr. Culpepper. "I am sorry, Cal," I whispered. He looked at me, his face grim. "You got a plan, Zeke?" he asked. I nodded. "I do." "Then you better execute it, son," he said, looking out at the car where Tiffany was reapplying her lipstick, before the weeds choke out the crop. I walked back to the car. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the fields. The red dirt seemed to glow like blood. As I climbed into the back seat, Tiffany turned around, beaming. "That went great," she said. "I mean, that old guy is useless, but the potential, Dad, the potential is huge. We are going to be rich." I looked out the window as we drove away, leaving the dust swirling in the air. I looked at the workers who had gone back to sorting pecans, ignoring the shiny black car. "Rich," I thought. "You are the poorest people I have ever met." I touched the recorder in my pocket, ensuring the red light was still blinking. The evidence was gathered. The jury of the soil had reached a verdict. Guilty on all counts. "Let's go home," I said, closing my eyes. I have seen enough, too. The phone started ringing at 7 in the morning, and it did not stop. It was not a social ring. It was the sharp, persistent trill of people who want their money. I sat at the kitchen table nursing a mug of black coffee, watching the panic unfold in real time. For the last 3 days since we returned from the farm, Tiffany and Jamal had been living in a fever dream. They were not just counting their chickens before they hatched, they were cooking the omelet before they even owned the hen. On the granite island in front of me lay a glossy brochure for the Aurelia, a new ultra-luxury high-rise in the city center. The cover showed a glass tower piercing the clouds, and the price list on the back had numbers that looked like phone numbers. $2 million for the penthouse suite. I watched Tiffany pacing the floor, her phone pressed to her ear, her other hand frantically gesturing to Jamal, who was sitting with his head in his hands. "Yes, I understand the deadline, mister." Henderson, Tiffany said, her voice tight and high. "The funds are being liquidated as we speak. It is an estate issue, complex assets. Yes, we are fully committed. Do not release the unit to the other buyer. We will have the deposit wire transferred by Monday morning." She hung up and slammed the phone onto the counter. She turned to Jamal, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and adrenaline. "They have another offer, Jamal. A cash buyer from Dubai. If we do not get that 10% deposit to them by Monday, we lose the unit. And we lose the $50,000 non-refundable holding fee we put on the credit card." Jamal looked up, his face gray. 50,000, Tiff. We do not have 50,000. That card is maxed out. If this falls through, we are bankrupt. It is not going to fall through, Tiffany snapped, although her hands were shaking. We have $5 million in land sitting in Georgia. We just need to unlock it. She spun around and looked at me. For a second, I saw the predator behind her eyes, but then she blinked and the mask of the concerned daughter-in-law slid back into place. It was a sloppy fit this time. The desperation was showing at the seams. "Dad," she said, walking over to the table, "we need to talk." I took a slow sip of my coffee, letting the silence stretch out. I wanted her to sweat. "About what, Tiffany?" I asked calmly. "About the transfer," she said, leaning in her expensive perfume, turning sour with the scent of stress. "We cannot wait any longer. The tax implications on the estate are getting complicated. My accountant says we need to move the title into a holding company immediately to avoid heavy penalties." Lies. Pure lies. There were no tax penalties. In fact, transferring titles so quickly would trigger taxes, not save them. But she banked on me being an ignorant old man who knew how to mix concrete but not how to read a ledger. "Is that so?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Yes, Dad," she insisted. "And besides, Jamal and I found this investment opportunity. It is a way to diversify the family wealth, a secure future for all of us, including you. But we need to show proof of assets to the bank today." She placed a hand on my shoulder. It felt heavy and cold. "We need you to sign the deed over Dad. Today. Right now. I have the notary on speed dial." I looked at Jamal. He was chewing his fingernails, a habit he had since he was 5. He knew they were gambling with money they did not have. He knew they were lying to me. But he said nothing. He just wanted the penthouse. He wanted the status. He wanted to be the man his wife wanted him to be, even if it meant stealing from his father. I looked back at the brochure. The Aurelia. It looked like a prison made of glass. "I cannot do it today," I said slowly. Tiffany's face hardened. "Why not, Dad? You said you wanted to help." "I do," I said. "But Simon, my lawyer, he is old school. He has the original deeds in his safe. He does not work on Thursdays. He is at the golf course. You know how he is." I saw the vein in her forehead pulse. "Call him," she demanded. "Tell him it is an emergency." I shook my head. "He will not answer. And besides, I need to read the papers, Tiffany. I may be old, but I do not sign things I have not read." I saw her hand clench into a fist at her side. She wanted to scream. She wanted to shake me. But she knew that if she pushed too hard, I might balk. She needed me compliant. "Okay," she said, forcing a smile that looked more like a grimace. "Okay, fine. When?" "Friday," I said. "Friday at 2 o'clock. We will go to Simon's office. I will have him draw up the transfer." "Friday is cutting it close," she muttered, looking at Jamal. "That gives us 1 business day to process the wire." "It is the best I can do," I said, shrugging. "Unless you want to wait until next month." "No," she shouted a little too loud. "No, Friday is fine. Friday is perfect." She let out a breath she had been holding. "Okay. Friday. That gives us the weekend to celebrate." She turned to Jamal, her mood swinging instantly from panic to euphoria. "We are getting it, baby. We are getting the penthouse. The view of the skyline is going to be insane." I finished my coffee. They were celebrating a victory that was actually a funeral march. They were so blinded by the glare of gold they did not see the open pit right in front of their feet. By Friday afternoon, the house was buzzing, but not with lawyers, with party guests. Tiffany had decided that since the deal was practically done, they needed to launch their new status with a bang. She had hired a catering company, probably on another credit card, and invited everyone she knew. People from her real estate firm, people from Jamal's old fraternity neighbors we barely spoke to. The house was filled with strangers. They walked on my hardwood floors with their shoes on. They sat on Beatrice's antique sofa, spilling crumbs. The air was thick with the smell of expensive cologne and cheap ambition. I sat in my favorite armchair in the corner, holding a glass of wine I did not want. I had bought a bottle of cheap Merlot from the grocery store because I refused to drink the champagne Tiffany had put on ice. I watched them. They were vultures. Tiffany was wearing a dress that probably cost more than my first truck. She was holding court in the center of the living room, a flute of champagne in one hand, and the brochure for the penthouse in the other. "It is going to be a game changer," she was telling a group of women who looked just like her, plastic and hungry. "We are going to turn the farm into an eco-resort and use the passive income to fund the city lifestyle. It is all about leveraging assets, you know. Old money is so static. We are making it dynamic. Old money." She was talking about my father's sweat. She was talking about the soil that had stained my hands for 40 years. She called it static. I called it sacred. Jamal was over by the stereo, laughing too loud at a joke that wasn't funny. He had his arm around a guy I recognized as a car salesman. "Yeah, man, the Range Rover is just the start," Jamal was bragging. "I am thinking of getting a boat, too. Maybe keep it down at the Coast House. Pops has this place right on the marsh. Prime fishing." I took a sip of the sour wine. It tasted like vinegar, but it suited the moment. A young woman I did not know stumbled over to my chair. She looked tipsy. "Oh, are you the grandpa?" she asked, smiling sloppily. "Tiffany told us about you. She said you are so sweet to give them everything. It is so rare to see that kind of generosity. Most old people hold on to their money until they die." I looked at her. She didn't mean any harm. She was just repeating the script she had been fed. "I am not giving them anything, darling," I said softly. "I am just returning what belongs to the earth." She blinked, confused. "Oh, that is poetic." She wandered off. Then came the moment I knew was coming. The toast. Tiffany clinked a spoon against her glass. The room quieted down. Jamal walked over to stand by her side, beaming like a child who had just won a prize. "Everyone," Tiffany announced, raising her glass. "I just want to make a quick toast. To new beginnings. And to family." She looked over at me in the corner. For a second, her eyes were cold, hard flint. But then she smiled a smile that didn't reach those eyes. "To Zeke," she said, "for trusting us with the legacy. We promise to take it to the next level. To the Harper Empire." The Harper Empire, the guests cheered, raising their glasses. I did not stand up. I did not raise my glass. I just sat there, gripping the stem of the wine glass until my knuckles turned white. The Harper Empire, she called it. An empire built on lies, debt, and the manipulation of an old man. She thought she was Caesar. She didn't realize she was Nero, and the city was already burning. The party raged on until midnight. I went upstairs early, locking my door. I checked the feed from the hidden cameras on my laptop. Downstairs, the guests were leaving. Tiffany and Jamal were alone in the wreck of a living room. "We did it," Jamal, Tiffany said, kicking off her heels and collapsing onto the sofa. "We pulled it off. Tomorrow he signs, and by Monday we are living in the sky." Jamal loosed his tie. He looked exhausted. "What if he reads the fine print, Tiff?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly. "He won't," she scoffed. "He is 72, Jamal. He trusts us. And even if he reads it, he won't understand the trust structure we are going to set up later. Once I have that signature, I can move the assets wherever I want." She laughed, a cruel sound that filtered through the microphone and into my quiet bedroom. "He is just a stepping stone, babe. A means to an end." I closed the laptop. A stepping stone. I walked over to the window and looked out at the street. The streetlights were flickering. Tomorrow was Friday. Tomorrow was the signing. They thought they were walking into a bank vault to make a withdrawal. They didn't know they were walking into a trap door. I went to my closet and pulled out my best suit. It was a dark navy wool suit I had worn to Beatrice's funeral. I brushed the lint off the lapel. I would dress for the occasion. After all, it isn't every day you watch your own children destroy themselves. I went to sleep that night with a calmness that surprised me. It was the calm of a soldier before the battle. I knew the plan. I knew the enemy. And I knew that when the sun went down tomorrow, the Harper Empire would be nothing but ash. Let them have their champagne tonight. Tomorrow they would drink the truth, and the truth I knew was a very bitter draught. The grandfather clock in the corner of Simon's office was ticking loud enough to drive a man insane, but to me, it sounded like a metronome counting down the final seconds of my family's delusions. We were sitting in high back leather chairs surrounded by shelves of law books that smelled of dust and authority. Simon sat behind his massive mahogany desk, his face unreadable, a stone wall in a three-piece suit. To my left, Jamal was vibrating with nervous energy, his leg bouncing up and down so fast it was shaking the floor. And Tiffany, she was sitting perfectly still like a cobra coiled to strike, clutching her designer handbag as if it contained the nuclear launch codes. She had dressed for victory today. She was wearing a white power suit that cost more than a tractor, and her hair was pulled back so tight it pulled her eyes into a permanent glare. She checked her diamond-encrusted watch for the third time in 2 minutes. "Can we get started, Simon?" she asked, her voice sharp and impatient. "We have a wire transfer deadline at 4 o'clock. We really need to expedite this." Simon looked at her over the rim of his reading glasses. He didn't like being rushed. He had been practicing law since before Tiffany was born, and he moved with the slow, deliberate speed of a glacier. "We will proceed when all parties are ready, Mrs. Harper." Simon said, his voice a deep baritone that filled the room. "This is a significant transfer of assets. We do not rush these things." He opened the leather folder in front of him. Inside was a thick stack of documents printed on heavy, cream-colored bond paper. Tiffany's eyes locked onto them. I could practically see her salivating. She thought those papers were the keys to the kingdom. She thought they were the quitclaim deeds that would strip me of my legacy and hand it to her on a silver platter. Simon slid the stack across the desk toward Jamal. "These are the papers your father has instructed me to prepare," he said. "Please read them carefully." Tiffany didn't wait for Jamal. She reached out and snatched the documents, pulling them toward her. She flipped past the cover page, looking for the signature line, looking for the clauses that said, "Transfer of title." I watched her face. It was a study in slow-motion disaster. Her smile faltered. Her brow furrowed. She flipped back to the first page. She read the title. Then she read it again. Her skin, which had been flushed with anticipation, turned a pale shade of gray. "What is this?" she whispered. She looked up at Simon, then at me, her eyes wide with confusion and rising anger. This is not a deed transfer. This says conditional management agreement." She slapped the paper down on the desk. "What the hell is a conditional management agreement? We agreed on a full transfer. Dad, what is going on?" I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms over my chest. I looked her dead in the eye. "We agreed that you would take over," I said, my voice calm and steady. "And that is what that paper says. You are taking over management." "But the title," she sputtered. "The ownership. We need the title to secure the loan for the business expansion." I shook my head. "You do not get the title yet, Tiffany. Not for free." I stood up and walked over to the window, looking out at the Atlanta skyline. "My father didn't give me that land," I said, speaking to the glass. "I earned it. I worked the fields from sunup to sundown. I fixed the fences. I paid the taxes when the crop failed. You two think inheritance is a right. It is not. It is a responsibility." I turned back to face them. "So here is the deal. That agreement gives you full operational control of the 3 farms and the coast house for a period of 6 months. You run it. You manage the harvest. You pay the workers. You deal with the suppliers. And if you turn a profit," I continued, my voice hardening, "if you show me that you can actually grow something besides debt, then in 6 months the title transfers to you. Automatically." Tiffany stared at me, her mouth slightly open. "6 months," she shrieked. "Dad, we cannot wait 6 months. We have plans. Immediate plans." "Then cancel them," I said, shrugging, "because that is the only offer on the table." Jamal looked at the papers, then at Tiffany. "Tiff, maybe it is not so bad," he said. trying to play peacemaker. "We just have to run the farm right. We can do that. It is just nuts. How hard can it be?" Tiffany shot him a look that could kill. She was doing the math in her head. I knew exactly what she was thinking. The deposit on the penthouse was due Monday. Without the title as collateral, they couldn't get the big loan. But, and this was the trap, if they signed this agreement, they could technically show the bank they had controlling interest in the property. It might be enough to float a short-term hard money loan. Risky, stupid, but possible. She looked at the papers again. "And what happens if we don't turn a profit?" she asked, her voice icy. I smiled a cold, humorless smile. "Read Clause 4B. She flipped the pages angrily. Her eyes scanned the text. "If the management team fails to produce a net profit of at least 10%, or if the property value degrades due to negligence, the assets will be immediately liquidated and the proceeds donated to the George Washington Carver Agricultural Charity." She looked up, horror-struck. "You would give it away," she hissed. "You would give $5 million to charity rather than your own son." "If my son is too incompetent to keep it, yes," I said. The room went silent. The tension was so thick you could choke on it. This was the moment. They could walk away. They could say, "No thanks, Dad, keep your farm," and go back to their lives. They would lose the penthouse deposit, but they would be free. But greed is a funny thing. It blinds you to danger. Tiffany wasn't thinking about the work. She was thinking about the humiliation of losing that penthouse. She was thinking about telling her friends she had failed. And in her arrogant mind, she genuinely believed she was smarter than a bunch of dirt farmers. She looked at me, her eyes narrowing. "You think we can't do it, don't you?" she said. "You think because I have a manicure and Jamal drives a nice car that we can't run a business?" "I think farming is harder than you think," I said softly. She laughed a harsh barking sound. "It is agriculture, Ezekiel. It is literally dirt and water. Humans have been doing it for 10,000 years. It is not quantum physics. I have an MBA. I have managed real estate portfolios worth 10 times this much." She grabbed a gold pen from her purse. "Fine," she said. "We accept the challenge. 6 months. And when we make a fortune, not just a profit, but a fortune, you are going to sign that deed and you are going to apologize for doubting us." She uncapped the pen and signed her name with a flourish, scratching the paper so hard she almost tore it. She shoved the papers toward Jamal. "Sign it," she ordered. Jamal hesitated. He looked at me, his eyes pleading for a way out. He knew. Deep down in his gut, he knew he wasn't a farmer. He knew he was walking into a buzzsaw. "Pop," he started. I didn't say anything. I just watched him. "Sign it," Jamal Tiffany snapped. "Do not embarrass me." Jamal picked up the pen. His hand was shaking. He signed his name. It was a messy scrawl, unlike his usual practice signature. Simon took the papers back. He checked the signatures, then stamped them with his notary seal. The sound of the stamp hitting the paper echoed like a gunshot. The thunk. "It is done," Simon said, closing the folder. "You have legal control of the operations effective immediately." Tiffany stood up, smoothing her skirt. She looked triumphant. She thought she had just outsmarted the old man. She figured she could hire a manager, cut costs, sell the inventory, and fudge the numbers to show a profit. "We will send you a postcard from the Harvest Festival, Dad," she said, smirk playing on her lips. "Try not to miss us too much." She turned and marched out of the office, her heels clicking on the parquet floor. Jamal followed her, head down, looking like a man walking to the gallows. When the door closed, Simon exhaled a long breath. He looked at me and shook his head. "You know they are going to try to leverage this agreement to get a loan right," Simon said. "It is risky, Zeke. If they default, the bank could try to come after the land." I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a cigar. I didn't light it, I just rolled it between my fingers. "Let them try," I said. "That agreement has a non-encumbrance clause buried on page 15. No liens allowed. Any bank that lends to them without reading the whole thing deserves to lose their money. And as for Tiffany, she thinks an MBA teaches you how to deal with boll weevils and drought." I stood up and walked to the door. "She is about to find out that nature does not care about her degree, Simon. Nature only cares about the work." I left the office feeling lighter than I had in years. The trap was set. The cheese was taken. Now all I had to do was sit back and watch the mouse try to bench press the mousetrap. 6 months. It wasn't going to take 6 months. I gave them 6 weeks before they were begging for mercy. I took the elevator down to the lobby. My phone buzzed. It was a notification from the security system at my house. They were home, probably popping that champagne now. Drink up, I thought. Enjoy the bubbles, because tomorrow you are going to be knee-deep in manure, and I am going to be the one holding the hose. The education of Jamal and Tiffany Harper had officially begun. The ink on the contract was barely dry when the first reality check hit them like a wet bag of cement. Monday morning rolled around and my son Jamal drove his shiny black Range Rover down to the farm ready to play the part of the gentleman farmer. He was wearing a polo shirt that cost $200 and pristine boat shoes that had never seen a speck of dust. Back in the city, Tiffany set up her command center in my dining room, surrounding herself with 3 monitors and a headset ready to manage the agriculture empire from the comfort of air conditioning. They thought they had won. They thought the hard part was getting my signature. They didn't know that the signature was just the entry fee to a gladiator arena where nature was the opponent and nature did not fight fair. I sat on the porch sipping my iced tea and checked the time. It was 9 in the morning. The phone rang. It was Jamal. "Pop, I am at the fuel depot," he said, his voice tight. "The company credit card isn't working. The guy says the account is frozen. I need to fill up the diesel tank for the tractors." I took a slow sip of tea, letting the condensation run down the glass. "The account isn't frozen, son," I said calmly. "It is closed. That was my operating account. You signed the agreement, remember. Operational costs are the responsibility of the new management team. That means you." There was a silence on the line so deep I could hear the fuel pump clicking in the background. "But Pop, that is $4,000, Jamal stammered. "I don't have $4,000. We spent the last of our cash on the holding fee for the penthouse. Then I guess the tractors don't run today," I said. "And if the tractors don't run, the irrigation doesn't get fixed. And if the irrigation doesn't get fixed, the trees get thirsty. Welcome to farming, son." I hung up. I didn't feel good about it, but I knew it was necessary. You cannot teach a man the value of $1 until he has to spend his own. Jamal must have called Tiffany in a panic because 10 minutes later she came storming out to the porch. She wasn't wearing her power suit today. She was wearing a silk robe and a look of sheer terror. "Dad, you have to unlock the funds," she hissed. "This is sabotage. How can we turn a profit if we can't buy fuel?" I looked at her over the rim of my glasses. "You said you had an MBA, Tiffany. You said you knew how to leverage assets. Figure it out. Sell the Range Rover. Sell your designer bags. Or maybe get a loan. Oh wait, you can't use the land as collateral, can you?" She glared at me, her face turning a blotchy red. She spun around and went back inside, slamming the door. An hour later, I got a notification that a personal credit card had been maxed out at the fuel depot in South Georgia. They had bought the fuel. They had survived day 1. But the interest rate on that card was 22%. The bleeding had begun. By Wednesday, the real chaos started. Tiffany decided that the problem with the farm was efficiency. She didn't like the payroll numbers. She called a Zoom meeting with Mr. Culpepper and the foreman Moses. I watched the whole thing from the hidden camera in the dining room. "Listen to me," she barked into her headset, waving a stylus at the screen. "The labor costs are bloated. Why do we have 12 people sorting nuts by hand? It is archaic. I want to cut the staff by 50% immediately. We need to automate." I could hear Mr. Culpepper's tinny voice coming through the speakers. "Ma'am, the harvest is coming in 2 weeks. If you cut the staff now, we won't get the crop in before the rains. And automation machinery takes months to order and install. You can't just fire people. I am the CEO." Tiffany shouted, slamming her hand on the table. "Do not tell me what I can and cannot do. Fire 6 of them. Today. We need to show a leaner budget for the bank loan." She hung up feeling triumphant. She thought she had just saved $10,000 a month. Thursday morning, the phone didn't ring. That was bad. In farming, silence is worse than noise. Silence means nothing is moving. I pulled up the live feed from the security cameras I had installed at the farm shed. The tractors were parked. The sorting tables were empty. There wasn't a soul in sight. Mr. Culpepper called me on my personal line a few minutes later. "Zeke," he said, his voice heavy. "Moses and the boys walked off. All of them. After that woman yelled at them on the computer and told them they were redundant, they just packed up and left. They said they aren't working for people who don't respect the soil." I closed my eyes. I knew this would happen. You don't treat men like Moses as line items on a spreadsheet. What about the irrigation, Cal? I asked. That is the problem, Zeke. Pump number 3 blew a gasket this morning. Without Moses to fix it, the South Grove is going to dry out in 48 hours. I wanted to drive down there. I wanted to put on my boots, grab my toolbox, and fix the pump myself. I could hear the trees calling for water, but I stayed in my chair. Tell Jamal, I said. Let him fix it. Jamal called me at noon. He was crying. Actually crying. Pop, the pump is spraying water everywhere, he sobbed. I tried to tape it, but the pressure is too high. And there is nobody here. The workers are gone. Pop, please, you have to help me. I looked at the brochure for the penthouse that was still sitting on the kitchen counter. The Aurelia. Luxury living in the sky. Look up the manual, son. I said, my voice hard as granite. It is a diesel centrifugal pump. You can find the schematic online. You wanted to be the boss. The boss fixes the leak. I hung up again. Friday brought the plague. Literally. I was watching Jamal on the camera feed stumbling through the orchard. He looked like a ghost. His expensive clothes were ruined with grease and mud. He was holding his phone up to a tree trying to take a picture of something. He came back to the farmhouse and called Tiffany. Babe, there are bugs, he said, his voice shaking. Little black bugs everywhere. They are eating the leaves. The trees look sick. Tiffany typed furiously on her keyboard in the dining room. Just spray them, she said, distracted. Buy some pesticide. What kind? Jamal asked. I don't know, Jamal, just Google it, she snapped. Get the strongest stuff they have. We can't have ugly trees when the appraisers come. Jamal drove to the hardware store. I knew what he bought because I saw the receipt later. He bought a general herbicide, Roundup. He didn't buy insecticide to kill the bugs. He bought weed killer that kills plants. He sprayed 5 acres before Mr. Culpepper physically stopped him. You are killing the trees, you fool, the old man had shouted, knocking the sprayer out of Jamal's hand. But the damage was done. 5 acres of prime pecan trees my father had planted in 1960 were scorching yellow, dying from the poison my son had fed them. The loss was easily $50,000 in future crop. Saturday night was the climax of the first week. Tiffany and Jamal were in the kitchen. The air conditioner was broken and they hadn't called a repairman because they couldn't afford it. The house was sweltering. On the table between them was a stack of bills, the fuel, the credit card interest, the emergency plumbing parts Jamal had bought but didn't know how to install, and the notice from the Aurelia. We need another $10,000 for the closing costs by Monday. Tiffany whispered, her face pale and sweaty. We don't have it. Tiff, Jamal said, his head in his hands. We have nothing. The farm is eating money. We made $0 this week. We lost money. Pop was right. Shut up, Tiffany screamed, throwing a glass against the wall. It shattered, sending shards everywhere. Do not say he was right. He is trying to break us. He is sabotage us. She paced the room like a caged animal. We just need to survive until the harvest, she muttered. The harvest is in October. We will sell the nuts, get a huge check, and pay everything off. We just need to keep the bank away for 4 weeks. She turned to Jamal. Sell the tractor, she said. What? Jamal looked up. Sell the big John Deere tractor, she said. It is worth $60,000. We sell it, we pay the deposit, we float the farm until harvest. But Tiff, Jamal said, his voice trembling, if we sell the tractor, how do we harvest the nuts? We will rent one later, she said, waving her hand. Or we will hire day laborers. It doesn't matter. We need cash flow now. I sat in the darkness of the living room listening. They were cannibalizing the business. They were selling the engine to buy gas. It was the death spiral of every failed business I had ever seen. I checked the terms of our agreement in my head. Clause 9. Unauthorized sale of capital equipment. It was a breach of contract, a massive one. But I didn't interrupt them, not yet. I wanted them to do it. I wanted the paper trail. I wanted the invoice of the sale. Because once they sold that tractor, they weren't just incompetent managers. They were thieves. Sunday morning broke with a heavy gray sky. The heat broke into a thunderstorm. I watched Jamal drive away in the rain, pulling a trailer with the big green tractor on it. He was taking it to an auction house 3 counties over. He looked back at the house as he left. He looked at my window. I stood there behind the curtain watching him. He knew what he was doing was wrong. But the fear of his wife, the fear of losing that penthouse, was stronger than his conscience. Go ahead, son, I whispered. Drive it away. You are not selling a tractor. You are selling your last chance at redemption. Tiffany spent the day on the phone lying to creditors, telling them the check was in the mail, telling them the farm was booming. She was delusional. She had convinced herself that one big score would fix everything. I walked into the kitchen at dinner time. There was no food. The fridge was empty because they hadn't gone grocery shopping. Hungry, I asked, opening a can of soup for myself. "We are fasting," Tiffany said, looking at her laptop. "Intermittent fasting. It is healthy." I chuckled. "Is that what they call being broke these days?" I asked. She didn't answer. She just typed louder. The first week was over. They had alienated the workforce, broken the irrigation, poisoned 5 acres of trees, and stolen a $60,000 piece of equipment. I sat down to eat my soup. It tasted delicious. The education was expensive, I thought, but the tuition was being paid in full. And next week, the real bill would come due, because nature had one more surprise for them. The weather report called for a hurricane, and without that tractor and without those workers, they were about to learn what happens when you leave the barn door open in a storm. The silence in my house that Tuesday night was heavy enough to crush a man. It was 2 a.m. The kind of hour when honest men are sleeping and desperate men are making mistakes that will haunt them for the rest of their lives. I sat in my study with the lights off, the only illumination coming from the blue glow of my laptop screen. My eyes were burning from fatigue, but I could not close them. I was watching a tragedy unfold in real time, pixel by pixel on the grainy night vision feed coming from the farm 3 hours away. Upstairs, Tiffany and Jamal were supposedly asleep, but I knew better. The air in the house had been vibrating with panic for 48 hours. The deadline for the penthouse deposit had passed, and they had managed to stall the developers with a lie about a wire transfer delay. But lies have a shelf life, and theirs was rotting fast. I took a sip of lukewarm bourbon and leaned closer to the screen. Camera 3 covered the equipment shed. The motion sensor had tripped 5 minutes ago, sending a silent alert to my phone. I watched as a pair of headlights cut through the darkness of the pecan grove. It wasn't the Range Rover. It was a flatbed truck, beat up and rusted, the kind used by scrappers and midnight haulers who don't ask questions. A figure stepped out of the shadows to meet the truck. Even in the low-resolution black and white footage, I knew that walk. The slight slump of the shoulders, the nervous twitch of the hands. It was Jamal. My son had driven 3 hours in the middle of the night not to check on the trees he had poisoned or the irrigation he had broken, but to strip the carcass of the farm he didn't even own yet. I felt a pain in my chest that had nothing to do with my blood pressure. It was the sharp, tearing sensation of a father's heart breaking. I had raised him to be better than this. I had taught him that a man's word is his bond and that you never touch what isn't yours. But Tiffany's poison had gone deep. She had hollowed him out until there was nothing left but fear and greed. I watched as Jamal spoke to the driver of the flatbed. The driver was a big man smoking a cigarette. He pointed at the barn doors. Jamal nodded, handing him a set of keys. They opened the big double doors. Inside was the crown jewel of the farm's machinery, the pecan harvester. It was a massive piece of equipment, red and shiny, worth $80,000 easily. It was the only way to get the crop in next month. Without it, the nuts would rot on the ground. Selling the tractor last week had been stupid, but this was suicide. Selling the harvester meant they had no intention of ever bringing in a crop. It meant they had given up on the contract. They were just looting the place before the ship went down. I watched them hook the harvester up to the winch on the flatbed. The chains strained and groaned. "Don't do it, son," I whispered to the empty room. "Don't cross that line." If he stopped now, it was just bad judgment. But once that machine left the property, it was grand larceny. It was a felony. He was stealing from the trust, from the charity, and from me. Jamal looked around nervously. He looked right at the camera mounted on the pole, but he didn't see it. He just saw the darkness. He waved his hand, signaling the driver to pull forward. The harvester rolled up onto the truck. I hit the record button on my laptop, ensuring the file was saved to 3 different cloud servers. The evidence was irrefutable, but they weren't done. The driver and Jamal walked over to the drying shed. This was where I kept the timber. Not just any wood, it was black walnut. 50-year-old planks that my father had milled himself, intending to build a new house for my mother. He never got to build it, but the wood was cured and perfect, worth a small fortune to furniture makers. I watched my son and the stranger load the planks onto the truck bed beside the harvester. Stick by stick, they were loading up my family history and selling it for pennies on the dollar to some fence who would probably turn it into trendy coffee tables. I put my glass down. My hand was shaking, not from age, but from rage. a cold, focused rage. They were not just incompetent, they were criminals. I checked the time. 2:35 a.m. I could have called the sheriff right then. I knew Sheriff Miller down in McIntosh County. One call and a patrol car would be waiting at the county line. I could have Jamal arrested before sunrise. But I didn't pick up the phone, because Tiffany wasn't there. She was smart. She stayed home in her silk sheets, keeping her hands clean while she sent her husband to do the dirty work. If I arrested Jamal now, she would claim ignorance. She would say he acted alone. She would divorce him, throw him to the wolves, and walk away to find another victim. Number one, I needed both of them. I needed to catch the puppet master, not just the puppet. I watched the truck drive away, its taillights disappearing into the Georgia night. Jamal got back into his rental car and followed it. I sat there for a long time staring at the empty barn on the screen. The farm looked violated, open doors gaping like wounds. I heard the front door open at 6 in the morning. Jamal crept up the stairs trying to be quiet on the floorboards that always creaked. I listened as he went into the bedroom. I heard the murmur of voices. Tiffany was awake. She had been waiting up for him. I got up and walked to the kitchen to start the coffee. I needed to see them. I needed to look them in the face while the crime was still fresh on their skin. When they came down an hour later, they looked like death. Jamal's eyes were bloodshot, and he smelled faintly of diesel and sweat, though he had tried to shower it off. Tiffany looked manic, high on adrenaline and caffeine. Morning pop. Jamal mumbled, heading straight for the coffee pot, avoiding my gaze. "Morning, son," I said, flipping a pancake. "You were out late. I heard the car." Jamal froze. His back went rigid. "Yeah," he said, clearing his throat. "Just couldn't sleep. Went for a drive. Cleared my head." A 4-hour drive, I asked, casual as the morning breeze. He turned around, forcing a smile that looked like a grimace. "Just driving around the city pop, thinking about the farm. Strategizing." "Strategizing," Tiffany chimed in, walking over to hug Jamal's arm. Her eyes were bright, too bright. "We have a new plan, Dad. We are going to outsource the harvesting. That is why we are clearing out the old equipment, to make room for the contractors." "Outsource," I repeated. "Yes," she said, pouring sugar into her coffee. "It is the modern way. Why own depreciating assets when you can lease services? We are going to run this lean." I looked at the stain on Jamal's jeans. It was red clay, Georgia clay. "You don't get that driving around Atlanta." "That sounds expensive," I said. "Hiring contractors. Do you have the cash for that?" "We will manage," Tiffany said quickly. "We have some liquidity coming in." "An investor." "An investor, that is what they called the fence who bought my father's walnut wood," well, I said, sitting down at the table. "Just remember the contract, Clause 7. You cannot sell any capital assets without written permission from the owner. That would be theft." Tiffany's cup clattered against the saucer. She stared at me, trying to read my face, trying to see if I knew. "Of course, Dad," she said, her voice sharp. "We know the contract. We aren't selling anything. We are just reorganizing." Jamal looked like he was going to vomit. He looked at me, and for a second I saw the boy he used to be. The boy who cried when he broke a window playing baseball. The boy who knew right from wrong. He wanted to confess. I could see it in his throat. But then Tiffany squeezed his arm. Her nails dug into his bicep. "We are handling it," she said, staring him down. "Everything is under control." I finished my breakfast. "Good," I said, standing up. "Because I am planning a trip down there this weekend. I want to see this new lean operation." The color drained from both their faces. "This weekend," Jamal squeaked. "Yes," I said. "Saturday. I want to inspect the barns, make sure everything is secure." I put my plate in the sink. I walked past Jamal and patted him on the shoulder. He flinched as if my hand were red-hot iron. "You smell like pine needles, son," I whispered. He stopped breathing. "Must be that new car freshener," I said, walking away. I went back to my study and locked the door. I opened the safe and took out the original deed, the one my father had given me. I traced the signature with my thumb. They had crossed the line. There was no going back now. They had stolen from the past, and they had mortgaged their future. I picked up the phone and dialed Simon. "Simon," I said, "it is time." "Time for what, Zeke?" "Time to prepare the eviction notice," I said. "And call the sheriff in McIntosh County. Tell him to expect a call from me on Saturday. I am going to report a grand larceny." But Zeke, Simon said, his voice concerned. "That is your son. If you report it, he goes to jail." I looked at the screen where the empty barn stood in the gray morning light. "My son died a long time ago, Simon," I said, my voice cracking just a little. "The man who was here last night was just a thief with my last name." I hung up. The second betrayal was complete. The first one broke my heart. This one broke my mercy. I sat there listening to them upstairs. They were arguing in hushed tones, probably about money, probably about the deposit they would make today with the dirty cash. They didn't know that the money they were holding was evidence, and the penthouse they were buying was just a cell in a different kind of prison. Saturday was coming, and judgment was coming with it. The middle of the week brought a strange and terrifying silence to my house. For days, the air had been filled with the sounds of panic arguments and the frantic typing of desperate calculations. Tiffany had been pacing the floor like a tiger in a zoo cage, realizing the meat truck was not coming. But suddenly on Wednesday afternoon, the pacing stopped. The shouting matches with Jamal behind their bedroom door ceased. The house settled into a stillness that felt heavy and suffocating, like the air before a tornado touches down. I was sitting in my study reviewing the footage from the farm. It was a disaster. The pecan trees were dropping leaves from the poison Jamal had sprayed. The irrigation was still broken. The few contract workers they had managed to hire were standing around smoking cigarettes because there was no one there to direct them. By my calculation, they had lost $30,000 in 4 days. They were not just failing the challenge, they were obliterating it. I expected Tiffany to come crashing into my room begging for a bailout. I expected Jamal to come crying to confess about the stolen harvester. But nobody came. I checked the camera feed from the kitchen. Tiffany was sitting at the island. She was not looking at farm spreadsheets anymore. She was on the phone, but her voice was low-hushed and dangerously calm. She was taking notes on a legal pad. Every few seconds she would nod and smile, a cold reptile smile that made the hair on my arms stand up. I switched the audio feed to high gain. "Yes, doctor, exactly," she whispered. "He becomes confused in the evenings. Sundowning, I think you call it. And the aggression. Yes. He threatened my husband with a hammer just yesterday." I froze. I had not held a hammer in 5 years. My hands were too stiff for carpentry now. She paused, listening to the voice on the other end. "I can have the affidavit ready by tomorrow," she continued. "And the medical history. You can sign off on it remotely based on my testimony, right?" "Excellent. The fee is no problem. We will wire it from the business account." I leaned back in my chair, feeling a cold knot form in my stomach. She was not trying to run the farm anymore. She realized she could not win the game I had set up. The soil was too honest for a liar like her, so she had decided to flip the board over. She was going back to her original plan, but this time she was bringing a nuclear weapon. Conservatorship. It is a word that scares old folks more than cancer. It means you are dead legally. You cannot sign a check. You cannot vote. You cannot choose where you live or who you see. You become a child in the eyes of the law, and your guardian becomes your master. I watched her hang up the phone. She ripped the page off the legal pad and folded it carefully. Then she walked to the fridge and poured herself a glass of wine. She looked satisfied. She looked like a woman who had just solved a difficult math problem by shooting the teacher. Thursday passed in a blur of tension. I stayed in my room, only coming out to get water. I noticed Jamal avoiding me even more than usual. He looked sick. His skin was gray and his eyes were rimmed with red. He knew. He knew what she was planning, and he was letting it happen. Friday morning arrived with a knock at the door. It was not a polite knock. It was the heavy, authoritative pound of the law. I was in the kitchen making toast. Tiffany was already there, dressed in black like a grieving widow. She didn't look at me. She looked at the door. "I will get it," she said softly. She opened the door. Standing there was a deputy sheriff. I knew him. It was Deputy Miller, a man I had barbecued with at the church picnic 3 years ago. But today, he was not smiling. He held a thick envelope in his hand. "Is Ezekiel Harper here?" he asked formally. "I am here, Miller," I said, stepping into the hallway. My voice was steady, but my heart was hammering against my ribs. "Mr. Harper, I have a service of process for you," Miller said. He wouldn't look me in the eye. He looked at his boots. "Emergency temporary conservatorship hearing and a medical evaluations order. You need to sign here." I looked at the papers. The text blurred for a second, then snapped into focus. Petitioner Tiffany Harper. Respondent Ezekiel Harper. Allegation advanced dementia. Violent paranoia. Inability to self-care. And there, stapled to the back, was a letter from a Dr. Eris Thorne, a man I had never met, a man who had never taken my blood pressure, never listened to my heart, never asked me the date. Yet there was his signature certifying that I was mentally incompetent and an immediate danger to myself and others. I took the pen Miller offered. My hand shook slightly as I signed, not from fear, from the sheer weight of the evil standing in my hallway. "You have a court date on Monday morning, mister," Harper Miller said, taking the clipboard back. "Until then—" He hesitated, glancing at Tiffany. "Until then, the court has granted temporary emergency guardianship to your son and daughter-in-law. You are not to leave the premises without their supervision." I felt the blood drain from my face. House arrest. In my own house. The house I built. "Thank you, officer," Tiffany said, her voice dripping with fake sadness. "We will take good care of him. It has been so hard watching him decline like this." Miller nodded and left. The door clicked shut. The sound was like the lock of a prison cell engaging. I stood there holding the envelope. I turned to look at them. Tiffany was leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed, a smirk playing on her lips. Jamal was standing behind her, staring at the floor, his hands deep in his pockets. "So this is the play," I said, my voice low and rough. "You couldn't grow pecans, so you decided to grow lies." "It is not a lie, Dad," Tiffany said, walking past me into the kitchen. "It is a necessary intervention. You are sick. You just don't know it. That is part of the disease. Anosognosia. Lack of insight." She poured herself a cup of coffee using my favorite mug. "We tried to do it your way," she said, taking a sip. "We tried the farm thing, but let's be honest. You set us up to fail. You gave us broken equipment and lazy workers. You wanted us to lose. That is just your paranoia acting up." I looked at Jamal. "Son," I said, "look at me." He didn't move. "Look at me, Jamal." I roared my voice, shaking the walls. He flinched and slowly lifted his head. His eyes were swimming with tears. "Tell me you believe this," I said, pointing to the papers. "Tell me you believe your father who built this house, who raised you alone after your mother died, who taught you how to read a blueprint. Tell me you believe I am crazy." Jamal opened his mouth. His chin trembled. "Tiff says," he started, his voice cracking. "Tiff says it is the only way to save the estate, Pop. The debts, the investors. If we don't get control, the bank takes everything." "So you are trading your father for a condo?" I asked. He looked away, unable to bear the weight of my gaze. "It is just paper, Pop," he whispered. "You will still live here. We will take care of you. Nothing changes, really. Just the signature authority." "Everything changes," I said. "You are stealing my life, Jamal. You are burying me before I am dead." Tiffany slammed her mug down on the counter. "Enough drama," she snapped. "It is done." The judge signed the temporary order. "As of this moment, you are a ward of the state, and we are your guardians. So go to your room, Dad, and give me your phone. We can't have you calling people and spreading delusions." She held out her hand. I looked at her hand. I looked at the long, manicured fingers that had never done a day of honest work. I wanted to crush it. I wanted to break every finger. But I knew that was exactly what she wanted. One act of violence, and she would have the proof she needed to lock me away in Shady Pines forever. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my old flip phone. I placed it in her palm. She smiled victorious. "Good boy," she said. "Now go upstairs. We have business to discuss with the real estate agents." I walked to the stairs. My legs felt heavy as lead. Every step was a battle. I could hear them behind me. "See," she whispered to Jamal. "It was easy. He knows he is beaten. By Monday, we will have permanent control. We can sell the farm by Wednesday." I reached the top of the stairs and walked into my bedroom. I closed the door. I didn't lock it. I wasn't allowed to lock doors anymore, apparently. I walked over to the window and looked out. The sun was shining. The birds were singing. The world outside was normal. But inside, I was a ghost. I sat down on the edge of my bed. I looked at the picture of Beatrice. "They took my phone, B," I whispered. "They took my rights. They think they took my voice. But they forgot one thing." I reached under the mattress and pulled out a small burner phone. A cheap prepaid device I had bought at the gas station 3 weeks ago along with the chewing gum, just in case. My hands were shaking as I dialed. Simon picked up on the first ring. They served me. Simon, I said. I know Zeke. Simon said, his voice grim. I saw the filing on the docket an hour ago. It is bad, Zeke. They have a doctor's affidavit. It is a fake doctor, I said. Dr. Thorne. Never met him. Doesn't matter, Simon said, until we prove that the judge has to take it seriously. You are on lockdown until Monday. What do we do, Simon? We fight, Simon said. But Zeke, you have to keep your cool. If you shout, if you argue, if you act angry in that courtroom, they will use it against you. You have to be ice. I am the iceberg, Simon, I said. And Zeke, Simon added, you need hard proof. The video of the theft, that is good for the criminal case, but for the mental health case, we need something that proves you are sane and she is a liar. We need to discredit that doctor. I looked at the hidden camera I had installed in the vent above my bed. I can't leave the house, I said. You don't have to, Simon said. My investigator dug up some dirt on Dr. Thorne. He lost his license in Florida for writing fake prescriptions. He is working under a provisional license here. He is desperate for money. How much did she pay him, I asked. $5,000, Simon said. We saw the wire transfer from your business account this morning. She labeled it consulting fee. I closed my eyes. They used my own money to buy the handcuffs. Bring the records to court on Monday, I said. I will, Simon said. And Zeke, lock your door tonight. Desperate people do desperate things when they think they have won. I hung up and hid the phone inside a hollowed-out book on my shelf. I lay down on the bed. I could hear them downstairs opening a bottle of wine. They were toasting to my demise. They were celebrating the death of Ezekiel Harper the man. But Ezekiel Harper wasn't dead. He was just waiting. Monday morning was going to be a bloodbath, but not the kind they expected. They were bringing a fake doctor and a forged narrative. I was bringing the truth recorded in high definition. I looked at the ceiling where the camera blinked its silent red eye. Keep watching, I thought. The show is just getting started, and the final act is going to be a masterpiece. Monday morning in the Fulton County Family Court smells like floor wax and broken promises. I walked in wearing my navy blue Sunday suit, the one I usually save for weddings and funerals. Today felt a little bit like both. I was attending the funeral of my relationship with my son and the wedding of my family to a permanent lie. Simon walked beside me, his briefcase heavy with the truth, but I had told him to keep it closed. Not yet, Simon, I had whispered in the elevator. Let them paint their masterpiece first. Then we will set it on fire. We took our seats at the defendant's table. The wood was cold under my hands. Across the aisle, Tiffany and Jamal were already seated. They looked like they had been cast in a movie about a tragedy. Tiffany was wearing a modest gray dress, high-necked and conservative, with no jewelry except her wedding ring. She had scrubbed her face clean of makeup, looking pale and exhausted. Jamal sat next to her in a black suit, staring at the table, his hands clasped so tight his knuckles were white. He looked like a man waiting for the executioner to pull the lever. The bailiff called the case. In re the conservatorship of Ezekiel Harper. The judge was a man named Abernathy. He was older, maybe my age, with silver hair and a face that looked like it had seen too many family squabbles. He looked tired. He looked at me over his reading glasses, and I saw pity in his eyes. It was the kind of pity you give a stray dog before you call animal control. He had already read the fake medical report. In his mind, I was already gone. Tiffany's lawyer stood up. He was a slick man with a shiny suit and a voice like oiled gravel. Your Honor, he began. We are here today with heavy hearts. This is not a petition for control. This is a plea for safety. My clients, Mr. and Mrs. Harper, love their father dearly. But as the medical evidence shows, Mr. Ezekiel Harper is suffering from rapid-onset dementia accompanied by severe paranoia and financial recklessness. He gestured to Tiffany. I would like to call Tiffany Harper to the stand. Tiffany walked up to the witness box. She wiped a non-existent tear from her eye before she even sat down. She took the oath, placing her hand on the Bible. The same Bible that says, "Thou shalt not steal, and thou shalt not bear false witness." She didn't flinch. Mrs. Harper, the lawyer asked softly, "Tell the court why you filed this petition." Tiffany took a shaky breath. She looked at the judge. Then she looked at me with a gaze full of practiced sorrow. "We tried so hard, Your Honor," she said, her voice trembling just enough to be believable. "We moved into his house to care for him. We tried to help him manage his affairs, but he started seeing enemies everywhere. He forgets who we are. Some days he thinks Jamal is a stranger. Lies. Pure venomous lies." "And the aggression," the lawyer prompted. "Yes," Tiffany whispered, looking down at her hands. "He gets violent. He throws things. He accuses us of stealing. Last week he threw his heart medication in the trash and claimed I stole it. He put his own life at risk just to spite us. We are terrified that he is going to hurt himself or burn the house down." I sat there perfectly still. My face was a mask of stone. Inside, my blood was boiling hotter than molten tar, but I didn't move a muscle. Simon shifted in his seat, ready to object, but I put a hand on his arm. "Wait," I signaled with my eyes. The lawyer walked back to his table and picked up a tablet. "Your Honor, we have audio evidence submitted as Exhibit B. This was recorded by Mrs. Harper 3 days ago. It demonstrates the depth of Mr. Harper's detachment from reality." He pressed play. My voice filled the courtroom. It was tinny and distorted, but it was definitely me. "They are coming to take it all. The vultures. I have to stop them. I have to cut them down before they destroy the roots. They don't understand the soil. They only want to feed." The audio cut off. The courtroom was silent. The judge looked at me, his brow furrowed with concern. To him, it sounded like the ravings of a lunatic talking about vultures and cutting people down. But I knew what that was. I had been in the bathroom practicing my speech for the cooperative, the speech I planned to give when I donated the land. I was talking about corporate developers. I was talking about protecting the legacy. Tiffany had recorded me through the door, stripped away the context, and turned my passion into madness. It was brilliant. Evil, but brilliant. "What do you think he meant by cutting them down?" "Mrs. Harper?" the lawyer asked. Tiffany sniffled and dabbed her eyes with a tissue. "I think he meant us," she sobbed. "Me and Jamal. He thinks we are the vultures. We lock our bedroom door at night, Your Honor. We are scared for our lives." She buried her face in her hands. The performance was Oscar-worthy. Even the bailiff looked sympathetic. Then came the financial attack. "And Mrs. Harper, has there been financial irregularity?" the lawyer asked. "Oh God, yes," Tiffany said, looking up. "He has been liquidating assets. He withdraws thousands of dollars in cash, and we don't know where it goes. He is hiding money. He is destroying the estate that his wife, my mother-in-law, worked so hard to build. We just want to preserve what is left for his care. We need the legal authority to stop him from spending himself into poverty." I looked at Jamal. He was the only one who knew the truth. He knew the cash withdrawals were for the farm payroll that they had refused to fund. He knew the money was gone because they had spent it on a Range Rover and a penthouse deposit. "Jamal," I thought, "say something. Stand up. Be a man." But Jamal just stared at the table. He was drowning in his own shame, but he was too cowardly to grab the lifeline of truth. Tiffany stepped down. She walked back to her seat and put her hand on Jamal's shoulder, squeezing it. A gesture of comfort to the audience, but a gesture of dominance to him. The judge turned to Simon. "Does the respondent have any witnesses?" Simon stood up. "Your Honor, we do. Mr. Harper would like to speak." I stood up. My knees popped. I buttoned my jacket. I walked to the stand, not with the shuffle of an old man, but with the stride of a soldier. I sat down and looked at the judge. "Mr. Harper," the judge said, his voice gentle, "you have heard the allegations. You have heard the recording. Do you understand why your family is concerned?" I looked at Abernathy. He was a good man, I suspected, just misled. "I understand, Your Honor," I said, my voice deep and clear. "I understand that my family is very concerned, but I think they are concerned about the wrong things." I looked at Tiffany. She was glaring at me, daring me to explode, daring me to yell. "I am 72 years old," I continued. "I forget where my glasses are sometimes. I have high blood pressure. I move slower than I used to." I paused. "But I know the difference between a hawk and a handsaw, Your Honor. And I know the difference between love and leverage." The judge leaned forward. "Mr. Harper, can you explain the recording? Who were you talking about cutting down?" "I was talking about weeds." "Your Honor," I said simply. Tiffany let out a loud scoff from her table. Her lawyer shushed her. The judge looked skeptical. "Weeds, Mr. Harper. Yes, sir. Invasive species. They look pretty on the surface, but underneath they choke the life out of everything they touch. If you don't cut them down, they kill the whole garden. I held the judge's gaze. I admit I was talking to myself. Old men do that. It helps us think. But being eccentric isn't a crime, Your Honor. And it certainly isn't a reason to take a man's freedom away. The judge sighed. He rubbed his temples. He looked at the medical report again, the one signed by Dr. Thorne. Mr. Harper, I appreciate your eloquence, but I have a sworn affidavit here from a medical professional stating that you are in cognitive decline. I have testimony from your primary caregivers that you are a danger to yourself. And frankly, that audio recording is disturbing. He looked at Tiffany and Jamal. The court's primary duty is the protection of the vulnerable. Based on the evidence presented, I am inclined to grant the conservatorship. It seems clear that you need help, Mr. Harper, even if you do not want to admit it. Tiffany let out a small gasp of relief. She smiled. It was a small, tight smile of victory. She had done it. She had fooled the system. She had turned the law into a weapon and pointed it at my head. I felt a heavy weight settle in my chest. This was the moment, the brink of destruction. If the gavel fell now, it was over. I would lose the farm, the house, the accounts. I would be a prisoner in my own life. I looked at Simon. He was sitting on the edge of his chair, his hand resting on his briefcase. He was waiting for my signal. I looked at the judge. Your Honor, I said softly, before you rule, before you sign that paper that strips me of my humanity, I have one request. The judge paused, his pen hovering over the order. What is it, Mr. Harper? You mentioned the evidence, I said. You mentioned the medical report and the testimony of my loving family. I stood up slowly. I would like to present my own evidence. Not words, Your Honor, not tears, but facts. Tiffany's smile faltered. She looked at her lawyer, who shrugged. They thought I had nothing. They thought they had swept the house clean. I nodded to Simon. Simon stood up and unlatched his briefcase. The click echoed in the silent courtroom like the cocking of a gun. Your Honor, Simon said, his voice booming. We have a counter motion, and we have Exhibits A through Z. He pulled out a thick stack of files and a USB drive. We are not just contesting the dementia, Your Honor, Simon said, walking toward the bench. We are contesting the character of the petitioners, and we are prepared to prove that this entire hearing is based on fraud, perjury, and grand larceny. Tiffany stood up so fast her chair scraped loudly against the floor. Objection! She screamed, losing her composure completely. This is a delay tactic. He is senile. Sit down. Mrs. Harper, the judge barked, his eyes narrowing. He looked at me. Fraud. Mr. Harper, that is a serious accusation. It is a serious world, Your Honor, I said, and the soil doesn't lie. I sat back down. The trap was sprung, the door was closed, and now the real trial was about to begin. The courtroom air was stagnant, heavy with the scent of cheap cologne and impending doom. Judge Abernathy sat high on his bench, his pen hovering over the order that would strip me of my rights, his face set in a mask of regretful duty. He had believed the performance. He had swallowed the lie that I was a senile, dangerous old man who needed to be managed like a broken appliance. Tiffany was dabbing her dry eyes with a tissue, already mentally redecorating my house. Jamal was staring at his shoes, unable to look at the father he was helping to bury. They thought the game was over. They thought they had checkmated the king. But they forgot one thing. The king doesn't move much, but when he does, the whole board shakes. Your Honor, I said, my voice cutting through the silence like a chainsaw through soft pine. Before you sign that paper, I ask for 5 minutes. Just 5 minutes to show you what my decline really looks like. The judge looked up, annoyed. Mr. Harper, we have already heard the evidence. You have heard stories. I corrected him, standing up straight. My spine felt like iron. My hands were steady. You have heard a script written by people who want my money more than they want my safety. But in my line of work, we don't build on stories. We build on foundations, and I have brought my own blueprints. I nodded to Simon. He stood up and walked to the clerk's desk, plugging a small silver flash drive into the court's projection system. Tiffany's lawyer jumped up. Objection. We haven't seen this evidence. This is an ambush. It is a rebuttal. Simon said calmly, his voice deep and smooth. You claimed my client is paranoid. You claimed he imagines enemies. We are simply proving that his enemies are very real. The judge lowered his glasses. Overruled. I want to see this. Proceed. The lights in the courtroom dimmed. A large screen descended behind the witness stand. The projector hummed to life, casting a grainy blue light over the faces of my accusers. The first video played. It was from the camera hidden in the smoke detector in my kitchen. The timestamp showed it was the day of my father's funeral. The audio was crisp. We have to do it this week, Jamal. The opening at Shady Pines won't last forever. We need to move him while he is still groggy from the funeral grief. A gasp went through the courtroom. It came from the court reporter. Tiffany froze. Her hand went to her mouth, but it wasn't to cover a cough. It was to stifle a scream. The video continued. If we declare him incompetent and get power of attorney, we can sell this place for $2 million easy. We put him in the home, use the surplus to pay off our debts, and finally live the way we deserve. I looked at the judge. His pen had dropped to the desk. He was staring at the screen, his mouth a thin, hard line. But we weren't done. The screen flickered to the next clip. This one was in color, high definition. It was the kitchen again a few days later. It showed me leaving the room dizzy and confused. It showed Tiffany walking to the counter where my pill organizer sat. The courtroom watched in dead silence as she opened the Tuesday slot, took out my blood pressure medication, and dropped the pills down the garbage disposal. Then she threw the empty bottle in the trash. "Oh, look," her voice on the video sneered. "You threw the bottle away, Dad. You must have finished them and forgot." The judge's face turned a shade of purple I had never seen before. He slowly turned his head to look at Tiffany. She was shrinking in her seat, shaking her head frantically, mouthing the word no over and over again. "That is not dementia, Your Honor," I said, my voice ringing out in the dark room. "That is attempted murder. That is a deliberate act to induce a medical crisis so they could claim I was unfit. They didn't care if I had a stroke. In fact, they were banking on it." Tiffany's lawyer was frantically stuffing papers into his briefcase, looking like he wanted to vanish into the floor. He knew right then that his career was hanging by a thread. But I had one more clip, the finisher. The screen changed to night vision. The green and black glow of the farm equipment shed. The date was last Tuesday, 2:00 a.m. There was Jamal, my son, opening the barn doors. There was the flatbed truck. And there was the $80,000 pecan harvester being winched away in the dead of night. "Don't worry about the old man." Jamal's voice came through the speakers clear as a bell. "He thinks we are reorganizing. By the time he figures it out, the equipment will be in Mexico and we will have the deposit for the penthouse." The video ended. The lights came back on. The sudden brightness was blinding, exposing everything. Jamal was weeping now. Ugly, silent sobs that shook his whole body. He knew he wasn't just losing a lawsuit. He was losing his freedom. I looked at Judge Abernathy. He wasn't looking at me anymore. He was looking at Tiffany with a disgust so profound it felt physical. "Mrs. Harper," the judge said, his voice dangerously quiet, "did you or did you not testify under oath 10 minutes ago that your father-in-law was paranoid for accusing you of stealing?" Tiffany stood up. She tried to speak, but her voice failed her. She looked around the room for an exit, but there was only the bailiff standing by the door, his hand resting on his belt. It was taken out of context," she stammered, her face pale as a sheet. "We were protecting the assets. He gave us permission." The judge slammed his gavel down. The sound cracked like a gunshot. "Silence," he roared. "You have perjured yourself in my courtroom. You have presented a fraudulent petition. And based on that video, you have engaged in elder abuse and grand larceny." He turned to me. The anger in his eyes vanished, replaced by a deep, respectful apology. "Mr. Harper," he said, "I owe you an apology. It seems your paranoia was actually high-definition situational awareness." I nodded slowly. "Thank you, Your Honor. But I have one more thing." I pulled a thick envelope from my inside pocket. "They claimed I have dementia based on a report from a Dr. Thorne, a man I have never met who was paid $5,000 from my own business account to sign a lie." I walked up to the bench and placed the envelope on the judge's desk. "This, Your Honor, is a cognitive evaluation from the Chief of Neurology at Emory University Hospital. It was conducted 4 days ago. It includes an MRI, a full psych evaluation, and a sworn statement from 3 independent specialists. The judge opened the envelope. He scanned the summary page. Mr. Harper scores in the 99th percentile for cognitive function for his age group, the judge read aloud. No signs of dementia. No signs of cognitive decline. Fully competent. He looked up at Tiffany. It seems, Mrs. Harper, that the only thing wrong with your father-in-law is that he is smarter than you are. The judge took the temporary conservatorship order, the paper that would have ended my life as a free man, and ripped it in half. Then he ripped it again. The sound of tearing paper was the sweetest music I had ever heard. Petition denied with prejudice, the judge declared. The temporary guardianship is dissolved immediately. Mr. Ezekiel Harper retains full control of his person and his estate. He wasn't done. Bailiff, take Mrs. Harper and Mr. Jamal Harper into custody. I am holding them in contempt of court for perjury, and I am referring this evidence to the district attorney's office for immediate investigation into elder abuse, fraud, and theft. Tiffany screamed. It was a sharp animal sound. No, you can't do this. We are the victims. He tricked us. He set us up. She lunged toward me, her claws out. Her face twisted into a mask of pure hate. You old devil, she shrieked. You planned this. You let us do it. The bailiff caught her before she could reach me. He spun her around and the click of handcuffs echoed through the room. I stood there calm and unmoving. I didn't plan your greed, Tiffany, I said softly, looking her in the eye as they dragged her away. I just gave it room to grow. You did the rest yourself. Jamal didn't fight. He stood up slowly, offering his wrist to the officer. As he passed me, he stopped. He looked at me, his eyes red and swollen. Pop, he whispered. I'm sorry. I looked at him. My son, the boy I had carried, the man who had sold me for a penthouse. I know you are son, I said, but sorry doesn't buy back the harvest. I turned my back on them. I walked over to Simon and shook his hand. Good work, Simon, I said. Simon smiled, closing his briefcase. All in a day's work, Zeke. What now? Now, I said, adjusting my tie. Now we go to the farm. I have a lot of work to do, and I believe I have some job openings to fill. I walked out of that courtroom a free man. The sun outside was brighter than I remembered. The air tasted sweeter. I had walked through the fire and come out unburnt. My family was gone, destroyed by their own hands, but my dignity was intact. And the soil was waiting for me. It was time to go home. The silence in Simon's office was different from the silence in the courtroom. In the courtroom, the silence was heavy with judgment, but here in the high-rise conference room overlooking the city, it was heavy with the suffocating weight of a dead dream. Tiffany and Jamal sat across from me. They were out on bail, released pending the district attorney's investigation, but they looked like they were already serving a life sentence. Tiffany's makeup was ruined, her eyes swollen and red. Jamal was shaking so badly his teeth were practically chattering. They hadn't wanted to come here. They wanted to go home and hide, but I had told them that if they wanted any chance of me asking the prosecutor for leniency, they would listen to what I had to say. I sat at the head of the long mahogany table. Simon stood next to me, his arms crossed, looking like a guardian gargoyle. You wanted the assets, I said, my voice low and steady. You destroyed a family. You broke the law. You humiliated yourselves in public because you wanted the assets. You wanted the Harper estate. I slid a heavy leather-bound binder across the polished table. It stopped right in front of Tiffany. Open it, I commanded. Tiffany looked at the binder as if it were a bomb. Her hands trembled as she opened the cover. Inside were the deeds to the 3 farms and the house on the coast. The papers were yellowed with age, covered in stamps and seals. You see that stamp at the top right corner, I asked, pointing a finger. The one that looks like a federal eagle. Tiffany squinted. Conservation easement. She read, her voice a whisper. Department of the Interior. Read the fine print, Tiffany. Read what you almost went to prison to steal. She began to read. As her eyes scanned the lines, her face went from pale to a color that reminded me of old ash. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. I will summarize it for you, I said, leaning back in my chair. In 1995, my father entered those 3 farms into the Federal Agricultural Preservation Trust. It is a permanent binding agreement with the United States government. I paused to let the words sink in. It means that land can never be subdivided. It can never be developed. No condos, no eco-resorts, no golf courses. It must remain agricultural land in perpetuity. If anyone tries to pour a concrete foundation for a commercial structure on that soil, the federal government seizes the land immediately and fines the owner 3 times the market value. Tiffany looked up. Her eyes were wide with a horror that went beyond money. It was the horror of a gambler who realizes the deck was missing the aces the whole time. But, she stammered, but the valuation. Zillow said it was worth $5 million. I chuckled a dry, humorless sound. It is worth $5 million to the earth, Tiffany. And yes, on paper it has value. But that value is locked. The only money that comes from that land is the annual conservation subsidy. It is a generous check, I admit. About $200,000 a year. Tiffany's eyes lit up for a split second. $200,000 was real money. But I continued crushing that spark before it could catch fire. There is a catch. To receive that subsidy, the primary beneficiary must reside on the property for 9 months out of the year, and they must personally certify that they are actively farming the land using organic methods. No contractors, no outsourcing. You have to sweat for that money, Tiffany. You have to bleed for it. I looked at her manicured hands. You can't sell it, I said. You can't borrow against it, because no bank will accept a deed with a federal restriction as collateral. The land is not an asset you can liquidate. It is a job. It is a lifestyle. It is a calling. I watched the realization hit her like a physical blow. She had mortgaged her life. She had committed perjury. She had alienated her husband from his father, all for a piece of dirt that she couldn't sell. She was trapped. She had bought a golden cage, but she didn't have the key to open it. What about the house? She whispered, her voice cracking. The beach house. You said it was on the marsh. Ocean view. That has to be worth something. We can sell that. We can flip it. I signaled to Simon. He flipped the page in the binder. There was a photograph of the coastal house. It was beautiful. An old Victorian structure with wraparound porches and intricate woodwork. Ah, yes, the captain's quarters, I said. My great-grandfather built that. It is a beauty. I tapped the paper. It is also a registered National Historic Landmark. Class A. Tiffany stared at me blankly. That means you cannot tear it down, I explained. You cannot renovate the exterior. You cannot even paint it a different color without a hearing before the Historical Society. And the maintenance. The salt air eats that wood alive. It costs about $40,000 a year just to keep it standing. If you don't maintain it to historical standards, the state fines you. I leaned forward, staring deep into her soul. It is a money pit, Tiffany. It is a place for family to gather and fish and tell stories. It is not a flip. It is not a spec house. It has zero commercial value because the cost of upkeep exceeds the market rental rate. Tiffany slumped back in her chair. The binder slid from her fingers. So it is all worthless, she whispered. The millions? The empire? It is all worthless. I stood up and slammed my hand on the table, making them both jump. It is not worthless, I roared. It provided for my family for 3 generations. It put food on the table. It sent Jamal to college. It is priceless because it is freedom. But to you, to a parasite who only knows how to consume and not how to create, yes, to you it is worthless. Jamal put his head in his hands and started to rock back and forth. The penthouse, he moaned. The deposit. Tiff, we spent the money. We spent the $50,000. We owe the creditors. If we can't sell the land, how do we pay them back? Tiffany didn't answer. She was staring at the wall, catatonic. The math was finally adding up in her head. Penthouse deposit, $50,000. Gone. Legal fees for the fake doctor, $5,000. Gone. Credit card debt for the lifestyle, $20,000. Total liquid assets from the Harper estate, 0. She looked at me, and for the first time I saw true fear. Not the fear of getting caught, but the fear of ruin. You knew, she hissed. You knew all of this. You let us dig this hole. I nodded slowly. I tried to tell you, I said. On the first day. I told you it was a burden. I told you it was hard work. I told you I wanted to give it to charity. But you didn't listen. You heard what you wanted to hear. You saw dollar signs where you should have seen sweat. I walked over to the window and looked out at the city. I gave you a choice, I said, not looking at them. I gave you a 6-month challenge. If you had actually worked the land, if you had respected the soil, you would have found all this out. You would have learned about the subsidies. You could have made a good, honest living. Maybe not a penthouse living, but a good life. I turned back to them. But you took the shortcut. You tried to cheat, and now you are paying the price. I looked at Simon. Show them the door, Simon. I am done here, Dad. Jamal pleaded, standing up. Dad, please. The bank is going to sue us. We will lose everything. The Range Rover, our apartment, everything. I looked at my son. You lost everything the moment you let that woman convince you to steal from your father, I said, cold as ice. You made your bed, Jamal. Now you have to sleep in it. And I suggest you get used to sleeping on a hard mattress because where you are going, the thread count is very low. Tiffany stood up. She tried to muster some dignity, but she just looked like a broken doll. You are a cruel old man, she spat. I smiled. A genuine smile this time. No, Tiffany. I am a farmer, and I just cleared the weeds from my garden. They walked out of the office. The heavy oak door clicked shut behind them. I sat down in the chair they had vacated. I picked up the binder and closed it, running my hand over the leather. My legacy was safe. The land was safe. Simon walked over and poured 2 glasses of scotch. He handed one to me. That was brutal, Zeke, he said. It was necessary, I replied, taking a sip. The scotch burned, going down a clean, honest burn. What happens to them now? Simon asked. I looked at the closed door. Now the real world happens to them, I said. The debt collectors, the district attorney, the divorce lawyers. I finished the drink and stood up. Come on, Simon. I have a bus to catch. I need to get back to the coast. The fish are biting and I have a house that needs painting. And unlike them, I don't mind the work. The drive back to Buckhead was a journey into the abyss for my son and his wife. I did not ride with them. I took a cab, a quiet ride where the driver listened to jazz and did not ask me why a man in a funeral suit looked like he had just won a war and lost a heart at the same time. I wanted to get there first. I wanted to be sitting on the porch when they arrived. I wanted to watch them realize that the destruction of their world was absolute. When their black Range Rover pulled into the driveway 20 minutes later, the sun was beginning to dip behind the magnolia trees, casting long shadows across the lawn. The lawn that I mowed. The lawn that belonged to me. They parked crookedly the way people do when their hands are shaking too much to steer straight. I was sitting in my favorite rocking chair, the one Beatrice used to knit in. Next to me on the wooden planks of the porch were 4 large cardboard boxes. They were not neatly packed. They were thrown together the way you pack trash, clothes spilling out of the top shoes, unmatched picture frames face down. Jamal got out of the car first. He looked at the boxes and then he looked at me. His face was the color of old ash. He walked up the driveway, his steps heavy as if he were walking through waist-deep water. Tiffany followed him. The fight had drained out of her. The arrogance that usually held her spine straight was gone, replaced by a slump of defeat that made her look 10 years older. "What is this?" Jamal asked, pointing to the boxes. His voice was a dry rasp. "That is your life, son," I said, rocking slowly back and forth. "Or at least what is left of it." Tiffany pushed past him, marching up the steps. She stopped when she saw her designer handbags thrown into a box with kitchen towels and dirty laundry. "You packed our things," she hissed. "You have no right. This is our home. We have residency rights. You cannot just kick us out without 30 days' notice." I stopped rocking. I looked at her with a gaze that could have stripped paint from a wall. "You are not tenants, Tiffany," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "Tenants pay rent. Tenants do not steal $80,000 worth of farm equipment. Tenants do not throw their landlord's heart medication in the garbage disposal." I stood up. My knees didn't pop this time. The adrenaline of justice was keeping me young. "You were guests," I continued. "Guests in my home. Guests in my life. And you violated every rule of hospitality." Tiffany reached into her purse and pulled out her key ring. She marched to the front door and jammed her key into the lock. She twisted it. Nothing happened. She twisted it again harder, rattling the handle. "It won't turn." "I changed the tumblers an hour ago," I said calmly. "While you were crying in the lawyer's office, the locksmith was here. He is a good man. Fast work." Tiffany turned around her back against the locked door. She looked like a cornered rat. "Where are we supposed to go?" she screamed. "We have no money. You know we have no money. You froze the accounts." "That sounds like a management problem," I said, using her own words against her. "Maybe you should leverage your assets." "Oh wait, you don't have any." Just then, Tiffany's phone chimed. It was a loud, cheerful notification sound that seemed obscene in the heavy atmosphere. She looked at the screen. Her jaw dropped. "What?" Jamal asked, stepping closer. "What is it, Tiff?" "It is the developer," she whispered. "The Aurelia." She looked up, her eyes wide with horror. "They canceled the contract. They saw the news. The arrest report is public record. They triggered the morals clause in the purchase agreement." She swiped the screen frantically. "And they are keeping the deposit," she choked out. "The 50,000. They are keeping it as a penalty for breach of contract." Jamal sank down onto the steps, burying his face in his hands. "Gone," he moaned. "It is all gone. I watched them. I felt a twinge of pity, but I crushed it instantly. I thought about the pills in the trash. I thought about the lie in the courtroom. I thought about the pecan trees dying from poison. There is one more thing," I said. I reached into my inside pocket and pulled out a folded document. It wasn't the deed. It was my last will and testament, the one Simon had drafted for me years ago, the one that left everything to Jamal. I held it up so they could see the seal. "Do you know what this is, Jamal?" I asked. He nodded without looking up. "It is your will, Pop." I ripped the document in half. The sound was loud in the quiet evening. I put the two halves together and ripped them again. I let the confetti pieces fall onto the porch floor, raining down on Jamal's head. "That was the old will," I said. "The new one was finalized this afternoon." I leaned against the railing, looking down at them. "In the state of Georgia, there are very few reasons you can completely disinherit a child," I explained. "Usually the law protects the heirs, but there are exceptions. Specifically, 2 exceptions." I held up one finger. Exception 1. Theft of the estate's assets. You stole the harvester Jamal. You stole the walnut wood. That is a felony. That disqualifies you from inheriting the property you tried to loot. I held up a second finger. Exception 2. Intentional injury or attempted harm to the testator. I looked at Tiffany, hiding my medication, trying to induce a stroke to prove I was incompetent. That is not just mean, Tiffany. That is malice. And the law has a very strict view on people who try to kill their benefactors. Tiffany was shaking her head, tears streaming down her face, ruining her expensive makeup. "We didn't mean to hurt you," she sobbed. We just wanted the house. We got desperate. Desperate is stealing a loaf of bread to feed your family," I said, cold as ice. Desperate is not trying to buy a $2 million penthouse by declaring your father insane. That is not desperation. That is greed, pure and simple. I took a step closer to them. "So as of today, you are out of the will. Not a dime, not a single pecan, not a splinter of wood from this porch. The estate will go to the charity, and whatever is left, well, I plan on spending it. I plan on living a long time, Jamal. Long enough to spend every cent you tried to steal." Jamal looked up at me. His eyes were red, his face wet with tears. "Pop, where will we sleep tonight?" he asked, his voice small and broken like a child's. I looked at the boxes. "You have a car," I said. "It is a nice car. Leather seats. Heated. It should be comfortable enough until the repo man finds you. But Pop—" "Get off my porch," I roared. The sound of my voice startled the birds from the trees. It was the voice of a man who had held his tongue for too long. "Get your boxes and get off my property. You are trespassing. And unlike you, I don't need to lie to get the police here. They are already on their way to take a statement about the stolen timber." Jamal scrambled up. He grabbed 2 of the boxes. Tiffany grabbed the others, clutching them to her chest as if they were life rafts. They stumbled down the stairs, almost tripping over each other. They threw the boxes into the back of the Range Rover. I watched them get in. I watched Jamal fumble with the keys, his hands shaking so bad he dropped them twice. I watched Tiffany sobbing in the passenger seat, banging her fists against the dashboard. They backed out of the driveway. Jamal clipped the mailbox as he turned, leaving a dent in the bumper of the car he would lose in a week. They drove away down the street, disappearing around the corner. I stood there on the porch alone. The silence returned. But this time it wasn't a lonely silence. It was a peaceful silence. It was the silence of a house that had been purged of a sickness. I looked down at the pieces of the torn will scattered on the floor. I would have to sweep those up later. I turned and put my key in the lock. It turned smoothly with a satisfying click. I opened the door and walked inside. The air in the house felt lighter. The smell of Tiffany's perfume was fading, replaced by the smell of old wood and lemon polish. I walked to the kitchen. I opened the fridge. It was empty except for my jar of pickles and a carton of milk. They hadn't even bought groceries. I chuckled. I picked up the phone and dialed the local pizza place. "Hello," I said. "I would like to order a large pepperoni pizza and a six-pack of soda." "No. Actually make that a bottle of champagne, the good stuff." I hung up and walked into the living room. I sat down in my recliner, the one Tiffany had tried to make me sell because it didn't match her decor. I leaned back and closed my eyes. I had lost a son today. That was a pain that would never truly go away. It would ache when the rain came, just like my bad knee. But I had found something else. I had found my spine. I had found the man I used to be before I let grief make me soft. I wasn't just an old man anymore. I was Ezekiel Harper. I was the steward of the land, and I had a lot of work to do. The sun set, completely plunging the room into darkness. But I didn't turn on the light. I sat there in the dark, smiling. Because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of what the morning would bring. I knew exactly what it would bring. Peace. The downfall of the Harper Empire did not happen in a skyscraper or a courtroom. It happened in a $29 a night motel room off the interstate where the neon sign buzzed like an angry hornet and the carpet smelled of stale cigarettes and regret. I wasn't there in the room, but I know what happened because the walls of those places are thin and silence travels fast in a small town. For 3 days, Jamal and Tiffany had been holed up in room 104, hiding from the repo man who was hunting the Range Rover and the process server who was hunting them for the stolen timber. They had $12 left between them. The credit cards were dead. The bank accounts were frozen. The dream of the penthouse was gone, replaced by the reality of a vending machine dinner. It was Wednesday night when the dam finally broke. Jamal was sitting on the edge of the sagging mattress, staring at his phone, praying for a miracle notification that wasn't coming. Tiffany was standing by the window, watching the parking lot nervously. "We need a plan, Tiff." Jamal whispered, his voice trembling. "Maybe we can call your dad. Maybe he can loan us." Tiffany spun around, and the look on her face wasn't fear anymore. It was pure, unadulterated disgust. It was the look you give a piece of gum stuck to your shoe. "My dad," she laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. "You want me to call my father and tell him I married a loser who couldn't even steal a tractor correctly? You want me to tell him we are homeless because you are too scared to stand up to your old man?" Jamal flinched. "It is not my fault, Tiff. Pop set us up. He trapped us." "He didn't trap us!" Tiffany screamed, throwing her hairbrush across the room. "He outsmarted you. There is a difference. He played chess and you were playing connect the dots. You are useless, Jamal. You are utterly useless." She grabbed her suitcase, the Louis Vuitton bag that was now stained with mud, and tossed it onto the bed. She started throwing her clothes into it. "What are you doing?" Jamal asked, standing up, panic rising in his chest. "Where are you going?" "I am leaving Jamal," she said, not looking at him. "I am done. The game is over. We lost. And I am not going to sink with the ship. But we are married," Jamal stammered. "For better or worse, right?" Tiffany stopped packing. She looked at him, and her eyes were cold, dead stones. "I married a man with potential," she said. "I married an heir. I didn't marry a broke ex-con who is about to be indicted for grand larceny." She zipped the bag shut. "I filed for divorce this morning," she said calmly. "My lawyer says that if I cooperate with the district attorney and testify against you regarding the stolen timber, I might get immunity. I can claim spousal coercion. I can say you forced me to do it." Jamal stepped back as if she had slapped him. "You would send me to prison," he whispered, "to save yourself." "I have to survive, Jamal," she said, walking to the door. "You are drowning, and you are heavy. I am cutting the weight." She opened the door. The humidity of the Georgia night rushed in. "Goodbye, Jamal. Don't call me. My lawyer will be in touch." She walked out. She didn't look back. She got into a yellow cab that was waiting in the parking lot and drove away, leaving my son standing in a cheap motel room with nothing but his fear and the silence. And in that silence, the demons came back. I had known about Jamal's struggle with painkillers for years. He had hurt his back playing football in college, and the pills had become a crutch. He had been clean for 2 years. But stress is the trigger on a loaded gun. Alone in that room with the wreckage of his life around him, Jamal didn't pray. He didn't call me. He went to the street corner. He spent his last $12, not on food, but on a packet of temporary oblivion. 2 days later, the rain came. It was a torrential downpour, the kind that washes the red clay into the rivers. I was sitting in my study reading a book but not turning the pages. I was waiting. I knew he would come. They always come back to the nest when their wings are broken. I saw him on the security camera first. He was walking up the long driveway soaking wet, shivering violently. He wasn't wearing his suit anymore. He was wearing dirty jeans and a t-shirt that was torn at the shoulder. He looked like a ghost. He looked like a stranger. He reached the front gate. It was a high iron gate I had installed years ago. He grabbed the bars and shook them. "Pop," he screamed. "Pop, let me in. Please." I stood up. My heart hammered against my ribs. Every instinct in my body as a father screamed at me to run out there to open the gate, to wrap him in a warm towel and feed him soup, to fix it, to make the bad world go away. But I stayed where I was. I gripped the edge of my desk until my knuckles turned white. If I opened that gate, I would kill him. If I let him in, I would just be enabling the sickness that Tiffany had fed, and the addiction that was now eating him alive. He didn't need a father right now. He needed a wake-up call. I put on my raincoat and walked out the front door. I walked down the driveway, stopping 5 feet from the gate. The rain poured down on us, a curtain of water separating my world from his. Pop Jamal sobbed, pressing his face against the cold iron bars. "Pop, I am sorry. She left me. She took everything. I have nowhere to go. I am hungry, Pop. Please open the gate." I looked at him. I saw the dilated pupils. I saw the tremors in his hands. I saw the track marks on his arm that the rain couldn't wash away. "You are high, Jamal," I said, my voice flat and hard. He shook his head frantically, sending spray everywhere. "No, Pop, number one. I am just cold. I just need a place to sleep. Just for tonight. Please. I am your son." "You are an addict, Jamal," I said. "And you are a thief. And right now you are not my son. You are a stranger wearing my son's face." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a piece of paper. I had laminated it so the rain wouldn't ruin it. I slid it through the bars of the gate. Jamal looked at it. It wasn't money. It wasn't a check. It was a list. "What is this?" he asked, wiping water from his eyes. "That is a list of 3 residential rehab centers in the county," I said. "They are state-funded. They are free, but they are hard. No phones, no visitors. Hard work and therapy." I pointed to the second name on the list. "I called the director at this one. He is expecting you. If you walk there, it will take you 2 hours. If you run, it will take you 1. Jamal crumpled the paper in his fist. "Rehab," he screamed. "I don't need rehab. I need my dad. I need money. I need help. I am helping you." I roared, my voice thundering over the storm. "Giving you money now would be putting a gun in your hand. Letting you in this house would be digging your grave." I reached into my other pocket and pulled out a business card. I slid that through the bars, too. "And this," I said, "is the number for Mr. Henderson. He runs a masonry crew downtown. He needs men to carry bricks. It pays minimum wage. It is back-breaking work. It will make your hands bleed." I stepped closer to the gate, looking deep into his bloodshot eyes. "You want to be a man, Jamal. You want to build an empire. Then start by building a wall. Start by getting clean." Jamal fell to his knees in the mud. He dropped his head against the bars, sobbing uncontrollably. "I can't do it, Pop. I can't do it alone." "You have to do it alone," I said, my voice cracking with the effort to hold back my own tears. "Because I carried you for 40 years, son. And look where it got us. You have to walk this part by yourself." I turned my back on him. It was the hardest thing I have ever done in my life. Harder than burying my wife. Harder than facing the judge. Every step back to the house felt like I was dragging a chain. "Pop, don't leave me," he screamed. "Pop." I didn't turn around. "Go to the clinic, Jamal," I shouted back without stopping. "Get clean. Work the job. Pay your restitution. And when you can stand on this porch and look me in the eye without shaking, then we will talk. Then you will have a father. But until then, you have a list." I walked up the steps and into the house. I closed the heavy door and locked it. Then I slid down the wood and sat on the floor in the dark hallway. I buried my face in my knees and I cried. I cried for the little boy who used to chase fireflies in the yard. I cried for the man who had lost his way. But I knew I was right. The soil doesn't lie, and neither does rock bottom. He had to hit it. He had to feel the mud in his mouth before he could remember how to stand up. I listened to the rain drumming on the roof. Outside, the gate was silent. I waited an hour. Then I checked the security camera. The driveway was empty. The laminated paper with the rehab centers was gone. The business card was gone. He had walked away. Not toward the city, not toward the dealers, but toward the west, toward the clinic. I touched the screen, tracing the empty road. "Walk, son," I whispered. "Just keep walking. It is a long road back, but I will leave the porch light on. Not for tonight, but for the day you earn your way back home. The salt air of the Georgia coast has a way of eating through metal, but it also has a way of healing a man's soul." It has been exactly 365 days since I walked out of that courtroom in Atlanta and drove south. One full turn of the seasons. I sat on the end of the long wooden pier I had rebuilt with my own hands, listening to the rhythmic slap of the water against the pilings. The sun was rising, painting the marsh grass in shades of gold and copper. My fishing line bobbed in the dark water, not because I was hungry, but because fishing teaches you patience. And patience, I have learned, is the only thing that truly separates the wise from the foolish. The house behind me. The captain's quarters was no longer a gray, rotting ghost. It gleamed white in the morning light. I had scraped every inch of that siding myself. I had replaced the rotten boards on the porch. I had glazed the windows. My shoulders ached in the evenings and my hands were rougher than sandpaper, but every time I looked at that house, I saw dignity. It stood tall against the wind, just like I did. I heard the crunch of tires on the gravel driveway. It was the mail carrier, a nice woman named Sarah, who always stopped to ask about the fish. She waved from her Jeep and put a single envelope in the box. I didn't rush to get it. I reeled in my line, checked the bait, and cast it out again. Desperation rushes. Peace takes its time. When I finally walked up the boardwalk to the mailbox, I knew who the letter was from before I saw the handwriting. It was a plain white envelope, no return address label, just a name scrawled in black ink, Jamal Harper. I sat down on the porch steps, the wood warm under my legs. I held the letter for a long time. The last time I had held a paper from my son, it was a lawsuit trying to declare me insane. My hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from a hope so fragile I was afraid to breathe on it. I opened it. Inside was a cashier's check for $500, and a letter written on notebook paper, the kind with the blue lines. "Dear Pop, I hope the fishing is good down there. I remember you saying the reds run thick in October. I am writing this from a small apartment in Marietta. It is not much, just a room really, but it is quiet. I got the job with Mr. Henderson. You were right, Pop. Carrying bricks is the hardest thing I have ever done. My hands bled for the first 2 weeks. My back feels like it is breaking every night. I come home so tired I can't even think about using. I just eat and sleep. I have been clean for 6 months and 12 days. The counselors at the center say I am doing good, but I know I have a long way to go. I am learning that trust is harder to build than a brick wall. Enclosed is $500. It is my first restitution payment for the timber. I know it is not much compared to what I stole, but I earned every cent of this pop. I didn't borrow it. I didn't steal it. I sweated for it. I heard about Tiffany. My lawyer told me she took a plea deal and moved back to Ohio. I don't miss her, Pop. I miss who I thought she was, but I don't miss the person she turned me into. I am not asking to come visit. I know I am not ready, and I know you aren't either. I just wanted you to know that I am still walking. I am still building that wall you told me about. Maybe one day it will be high enough to stand behind. I am sorry, Pop, for everything. Love, Jamal. I read the letter twice. Then I read it a third time. I looked at the check. $500. A year ago, Jamal wouldn't have bent down to pick up a $500 bill off the street. To the old Jamal, $500 was a bottle of champagne or a dinner at a steakhouse. But this $500 was different. It was heavy. It carried the weight of 6 months of waking up at dawn. It carried the weight of mortar and stone and blisters. It was the most valuable piece of paper I had ever held. I stood up and walked into the house. I went to the mantel above the fireplace where I kept Beatrice's picture. She was smiling in the photo, young and full of life. I propped the letter up next to her frame. "You see this, Bea," I whispered. "He is coming back to us. Not the easy way, the hard way." I didn't call him. I didn't write back immediately. If I answered too fast, he might think the work was done, and the work is never done. But But I went to the kitchen and made a mark on the calendar. 1 year from today, if he was still clean, if the checks kept coming, I would drive up to Marietta. I would take him to lunch. I wouldn't offer him a room. I wouldn't offer him money. I would offer him a handshake, man to man. I walked back outside. The day was waiting. I climbed into my old Ford pickup truck. It rattled and coughed as I started it up, but the engine was strong. I had a delivery to make. I drove 30 miles inland past the pine forests and the cotton fields until I reached the farm, the Harper farm. But it didn't look like it used to. It looked better. The sign out front had been repainted. New Roots Cooperative, home of the Beatrice Harper Scholarship Fund. I pulled up to the main barn. It was buzzing with activity. A dozen young people were moving crates of pecans, loading them onto a refrigerated truck. They were laughing. They were shouting instructions. There was music playing from a radio. Elijah saw my truck and ran over. He looked tired but happy. "Mr. Zeke," he yelled, wiping his hands on his apron. "You are just in time. We are shipping the first batch of organic pralines to the market in Savannah. The yield this year is 20% higher than we projected." I got out of the truck and walked into the barn. The smell of roasting pecans and caramelized sugar filled the air. It was the smell of success. I watched them work. These kids didn't share my blood. They didn't have the name Harper. But as I watched Elijah help a younger student lift a heavy crate, as I watched a girl named Sarah carefully inspecting the labels, I realized something profound. Family isn't just who you are born with. It is who you build with. These young farmers were my legacy. They were the ones who would keep the soil alive long after I was gone. They were the ones who would ensure that Beatrice's name meant hope for 1,000 children she never met. Elijah handed me a box of the pralines. "For the ride home, Mr. Zeke," he said, smiling. I took the box. "How is the irrigation holding up, Elijah?" I asked. "Holding strong, sir. We fixed that gasket ourselves. We didn't even have to call a plumber." I nodded, satisfied. "Keep it tight, son," I said, patting his shoulder. "The soil doesn't lie." I drove back to the coast with the windows down, letting the wind whip through the cab. I thought about Jamal carrying bricks in the hot sun. I thought about Tiffany somewhere in Ohio, probably looking for her next victim. And I thought about Elijah and his crew building a future out of dirt and sweat. I was 73 years old. My knees hurt. My back was stiff. I lived alone in a big old house at the edge of the world. But as I pulled into my driveway and saw the ocean stretching out to the horizon, infinite and blue, I realized I wasn't lonely. I wasn't sad. I was full. I had cleared the weeds. I had pruned the dead branches. And now, finally, my garden was growing. I turned off the truck and sat there for a moment, listening to the silence. It wasn't an empty silence. It was a silence filled with promise. "I am ready, B," I whispered to the sky. I am ready for whatever comes next, because for the first time in a long time, I knew that when I finally laid my head down, the things I left behind would be strong enough to stand on their own. In the twilight of my life, I realized that inheritance isn't about the soil you leave behind, but the spine you build in your children. For years, I thought loving Jamal meant shielding him from the rain. I was wrong. By giving him an umbrella he didn't earn, I only taught him to fear the storm. True love sometimes wears the mask of severity. It took stripping my son of every unearned privilege to finally help him find his own worth. The farms are gone, but for the first time in 40 years, I see a man standing where a boy used to hide. If this story touched you, or if you've ever had to make a hard choice to save someone you love, please hit that like button and share this with your friends. And tell me in the comments, do you think I was too hard on Jamal, or was it the only way to save him? I read every single comment. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories about justice, resilience, and the truth that sets us free. See you in the next one.